Chapter 482. Just as Ice Celestial Corey and his party no longer paid attention to Han Shua's existence and instead focused their attention on dealing with Water Elite Zombie, Han Shua, who had hidden himself within the stone wall with the help of Metal Elite Zombie's energy, suddenly shot out like a sharp sword. Watch out! This time, it was Ice Celestial Corey who shouted. The two magi who had been staying at the cliff at the top of the ice goddess statue suddenly sensed an intense bloody aura assaulting their nostrils. The nauseating bloody aura condensed into a bloody mist, enveloping Han Shua in an instant. Seeing that Ice Celestial Corey had finally recognized the situation after being warned, Han Shua knew that it was meaningless to continue dodging and playing guerrilla warfare. Even at the risk of getting injured, he had to obstruct them at this critical moment and buy enough time for Water Elite Zombie to absorb the energy. Among this party, the two magi who were frozen and motionless at the top were the weakest. However, they posed the greatest threat to Han Shua. Once Han Shua decided to face them head-on, only these two magi could succeed in a short time. Therefore, without the slightest hesitation, Han Shua fiercely shot out from within the stone wall and deliberately released an enormous aura to let Ice Celestial Corey know of his plan and temporarily give up on attacking Water Elite Zombie. However, this time, Ice Celestial Corey paid no attention to Han Shua. After loudly reminding him, he once again charged at the ice goddess statue. It seemed that he had awakened from his previous madness and realized that a god-grade existence was much more important than two sacred magi. This was out of Han Shua's expectations. As the two magi hastily retreated in fear and trepidation, Han Shua decisively gave up on pursuing the two. His body suddenly changed direction in midair, and with a surging killing intent, he transformed into a bloody cloud and shrouded Ice Celestial Corey and his party below. As matters stood, Han Shua had no choice but to face them head-on. He could no longer dodge and take advantage of the terrain to launch sneak attacks. The moment Corey raised his head and saw the blood cloud descending upon him, he immediately understood that it contained an energy that could destroy everything. His expression changed, and he immediately understood the situation. He fiercely swung his sword at the blood cloud and shouted, "Ice Blast!" as though it was premeditated. After Ice Celestial Corey uttered the word blizzard, the eyes of the four sacred swordsmen beside Corey flourished with a cold glint. Together with Ice Celestial Corey, they brandished their swords to meet the blood cloud. Including Ice Celestial Corey, a total of 5 fighting auras mixed with the divine energy bestowed by the ice goddess suddenly converged at the blood cloud. The 5 powers collided with each other within the blood cloud, and a terrifying ice explosion suddenly occurred within the blood cloud. The ice explosion formed by the 5 powers was extremely ferocious, and it completely covered the blood cloud. Han Shua had no time to dodge, and he was immediately heavily injured by the ice explosion. Ha ha ha! Corey laughed maniacally. His laughter was filled with pride. Ice Blast was a secret technique of the Shrine of Ice. It utilized the divine power bestowed by the Goddess of Ice and mixed it with fighting aura to create a large-scale explosion of solid ice. Once one was enveloped by the Ice Blast, the might of the frightening icicles would increase exponentially, possessing an unstoppable force of impact. After suffering repeated setbacks, Ice Celestial Corey finally used the secret technique of the shrine to recover from his disadvantageous position. One could well imagine how carefree he was. "Filthy necromancer, let's see how you escape this time." Ice Celestial Corey laughed heartily. Together with the 4 sacred swordsmen beside him, he stared fixedly at the gradually dissipating blood cloud. The power of the ice blast dissipated the murderous aura of the blood cloud. Han Shua's body slowly emerged from within the blood cloud. Han Shua's body was riddled with thousands of holes, as though his body had been pierced by thousands of invisible arrows of various sizes. Holes of various sizes were revealed one after another. There was a large hole in his chest, from which his internal organs could be clearly seen. At this moment, Han Shua's appearance was even more unsightly than that of a malicious spirit. Not a single piece of undamaged skin could be found on his body. Under the impact of the ice blast, his body was in a state of devastation. He was in an unprecedented sorry state. Without a doubt, Han Shuo had indeed been gravely injured by the ice blast. The ice blast, launched by a demigod expert and 4 sacred swordsmen, using the secret technique of the Shrine of Ice, had indeed gravely injured Han Shuo. However, when Han Shuo's body was completely revealed, the laughter of Ice Celestial Kori, who had been laughing wildly all along, came to a screeching halt. The complacent expression on his face turned into shock. He looked at Han Shuo, whose appearance was even more unsightly than that of a malicious spirit, with an incredulous expression. Han Shuo's body was riddled with thousands of holes. His internal organs could be seen from the gaping wounds, yet not a single drop of blood flowed out from the wounds. What was even more inconceivable to Kori was that the badly mangled flesh on Han Shuo's body was slowly squirming. The gaping wounds were healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Bizarre. It was unimaginably strange. Anyone who witnessed such a bizarre scene would presumably be as shocked as Ice Celestial Kori and the other 4 swordsmen. They would be equally dumbfounded and at a loss as to what to do. This was an instinctive fear of the unknown. You, what in the world are you? Ice Celestial Kori, who had unwittingly developed an intense wariness towards Han Shuo, looked anxiously at Han Shuo, who was standing proudly in midair. His body was riddled with thousands of wounds, yet not a single drop of blood flowed out. His fleshly body was rapidly healing like a monster. Unable to suppress the fear in his heart, Kori cried out in alarm with a somewhat trembling voice. Han Shuo had a bitter smile on his face. He had indeed been gravely injured by the ice blast. However, because the icicles had shot into his body, the extreme coldness temporarily froze his blood for a moment. This allowed Han Shuo, who had an abnormally tough body, to control his injuries in an extremely short period of time. Under the circulation of demonic yuan, the fibers of his skin completely absorbed the blood. Only then, after the icy aura dispersed, did not let a single drop of blood drip out. Utilizing the unimaginably tough and abnormal tenacity of his fleshly body, he rapidly healed his wounds. However, Han Shuo had indeed been injured, and his injuries were not light. The rapid healing process of his body was inconceivably bizarre in Ice Celestial Kori's eyes. The damage to his body was truly enormous. The healing process of his fleshly body required the consumption of an enormous amount of blood and demonic yuan. This would cause Han Shuo to lose a lot of strength in battle. However, because of the bloody holes on his face, Han Shuo, who was grinning bitterly, suddenly revealed a bitter smile on his sinister and frightening face. That was truly an evil smile that would cause one's scalp to go numb. In the eyes of Ice Celestial Kori and his party, it was absolutely terrifying. Kori and his party were frightened out of their wits by Han Shuo's bitter smile. Looking at the inconceivable Han Shuo, at this moment, Ice Celestial Kori and his party could not associate Han Shuo with a human being no matter how hard they tried. Han Shuo clearly sensed the trembling in Ice Celestial Kori's voice. With a thought, he immediately understood why Ice Celestial Kori's voice was trembling. This was all because Kori and his party had never seen any living creature with such frightening regenerative abilities. This was an instinctive fear of the unknown, especially when Han Shuo's appearance, which was riddled with thousands of holes, was indeed malevolent and frightening, unlike a human being. Coming to his senses, Han Shuo seized the opportunity to rapidly heal the heavy injuries on his fleshly body while laughing wildly. His laughter was filled with ruthlessness and savagery. He even took the opportunity to add the soul-sucking evil power of the Omen Echo to his laughter, which had a wonderful misleading effect on one's mind. Sure enough, under the effect of Han Shuo's soul-sucking evil power of the Omen Echo, the already terrified Ice Celestial Kori became more and more fearful. Looking at Han Shuo's malevolent appearance again, it was as if Han Shuo had turned into a demon that had existed since ancient times. With a casual strike from him, the demon had torn apart its usual disguise, revealing its true evil form to him. You, which material plane are you from? Our Shrine of Ice is the Church of the Ice Goddess. What do you want? On one hand, it was the effect of the Omen Echo, And on the other hand, it was because they were truly terrified of Han Shuo. One of the 4 sacred swordsmen suddenly cried out in alarm and took a step back. Who are you? This person's loud cries seemed to have alerted the others. Another sacred swordsman also cried out in alarm. Ice Celestial Kori looked at the heavily injured Han Shuo in fear. He seemed to have suddenly come to a realization and associated it with Han Shuo's never-before-seen miraculous skills. He was certain that Han Shuo was not an existence that belonged to profound continent. The fear in his heart grew even stronger. His eyes began to flicker as he rapidly thought of a way to escape. We are the emissaries of the Ice Goddess. Don't act recklessly. Finally, under the effects of the Omen Echo and the Omen Echo, in addition to Han Shuo's bizarre performance, Ice Celestial Kori actually started to tremble and babble nonsense. It was at this moment that Water Elite Zombie suddenly transmitted, "Father, I'm done." Han Shuo, who was laughing maniacally, lowered his head to take a look. He discovered that the naked young lady had shriveled into a corpse without any moisture. Her former beauty was nowhere to be seen. The enormous statue of the Ice Goddess also suddenly crumbled under Water Elite Zombie's voice. Like a collapsing mountain, it crashed to the ground from the top of Han Shuo's head. Ha 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 ha. Han Shuo laughed maniacally. He found it hard to restrain himself from the foolish looks of Ice, Celestial Kori, and the others. This time, he did not use the Omen Echo. Boom. Metal Elite Zombie popped out of nowhere above Han Shuo's head. The golden cudgel smashed down on the heads of 2 dumbstruck sacred magi. The 2 sacred magi, who were similarly petrified by Han Shuo, were turned into meat patties by the golden cudgel. Who cares which material plane he is from? We will fight him to the death. As the Ice Goddess statue crumbled, Ice Celestial Kori once again went berserk. He recklessly charged at Han Shuo. At this moment, the heavily injured Han Shuo did not get entangled with the desperate Ice Celestial Kori. He was still laughing maniacally, entering the rock wall that suddenly split open with Water Elite Zombie and calmly leaving the Shrine of Ice. Chapter 483. With Metal Elite Zombie leading the way, the tight security of the Shrine of Ice's main peak was practically non-existent. A long and narrow passageway was opened up in the solid rock walls. Han Shuo and Water Elite Zombie followed behind Metal Elite Zombie and rapidly retreated. The Ice Goddess statue was the crux of Project God-making. The Ice Goddess statue, developed by numerous masters in alchemy, pharmaceutics, and smithing, was the foundation of all Ice Celestial Kori's hopes. Its collapse was like a sharp sword ruthlessly stabbing into Kori's heart, causing him unbearable pain. From the feedback Metal Elite Zombie gave to Han Shuo, he understood that all the masters who refined the Ice Goddess statue had been killed by him. Having lost these masters who had spent many years in this field, Ice Celestial Kori's Project God-making could never be restored. Although Han Shuo, who had sustained serious injuries from the ice blast, had successfully intimidated Ice Celestial Kori and the others by using the demonic siren and the fear they had towards him. When Han Shuo saw that Ice Celestial Kori had once again sunk into madness because of the Ice Goddess statue, he knew that Kori would not be easy to deal with in his desperation. Therefore, he had no choice but to leave for the time being. When they were some distance away from the belly of the mountain, Han Shuo turned his head to look at Water Elite Zombie, who had absorbed an enormous amount of energy. When he did so, Han Shuo was suddenly startled. He was delighted by the transformation of Water Elite Zombie. After absorbing the energy of ice and water from the Ice Goddess statue, Water Elite Zombie's originally ordinary appearance had undergone a complete transformation. His thick eyebrows became slender and curved, his nose high and straight. His dry and dull skin became as moist and smooth as water. Even his withered yellow hair shone with a bright luster. The most ordinary Water Elite Zombie, after absorbing that energy, had actually transformed into an elegant and handsome youth. Due to the abundance and transformation of the energy in his body, this handsome youth had a kind of gentle and bewitching temperament, very attractive. Misty water vapor constantly swirled around the Water Elite Zombie. As Han Shuo gazed at it, the Water Elite Zombie gave him a kind of ethereal beauty that didn't seem real. Compared to before, Water Elite Zombie had undergone a complete transformation, be it in appearance or temperament. What astonished Han Shuo the most was that the transformation was still ongoing. Han Shuo understood that the amount of energy absorbed by the Water Elite Zombie was enormous. The digestion process was not something that could be completed in a short period of time. However, once the Water Elite Zombie completely absorbed and digested the energy, Han Shuo believed that the Water Elite Zombie would certainly bring him an even greater surprise. I'll send you back first. You need to quietly absorb this energy. After sensing the condition of Water Elite Zombie's body, Han Shuo softly chanted an incantation and sent Water Elite Zombie back to the Netherworld. Not long after the Water Elite Zombie left, Han Shuo, with Metal Elite Zombie leading the way, returned to the rock wall at the center of the mountain. Standing at the mouth of the cliff, Han Shuo raised his head and gazed at the vast expanse of white ice and snow. He sensed the experts moving at high speed within the belly of the mountain. Han Shuo muttered to himself, "Shrine of Ice, my revenge has only just begun." Upon finishing those words, Han Shuo also sent Metal Elite Zombie back to the Netherworld. His body's injuries did not allow Han Shuo to stay any longer. He found an opportune moment and soared into the sky, transforming into a streak of light and rapidly departing from the snowy region of the Shrine of Ice. In Icicle City, Han Shuo settled down in an ordinary small hotel. For the past few days, Han Shuo had been staying in his room. The physical injuries he suffered at the Shrine of Ice had been stabilized by Han Shuo. The damage to Han Shuo's physical body required blood essence and demonic yuan to heal. This healing process was actually not very long and merely consumed Han Shuo's blood essence and demonic yuan. Blood essence and demonic yuan needed to be cultivated over a long period of time in order to be improved bit by bit. Once too much was consumed, it would truly affect Han Shuo's strength. After a few days of effort, Han Shuo's body that was riddled with holes had completely recovered. However, a significant amount of blood essence and demonic yuan had indeed been consumed. After meditating for a few days, Han Shuo's demonic yuan had somewhat recovered. However, he could not convert too much blood essence within a short period of time. Seeing that his injuries had stabilized, Han Shuo recalled that Gilbert's soul was inside the Demon's Lair Edge. The inside of the Demon's Lair Edge was not a good place. Any soul that entered the Demon's Lair Edge would be corroded by it. Even though Han Shuo had specially opened up an area for Gilbert, he still could not allow him to stay inside for too long. Therefore, Han Shuo used some of the materials he had in his space ring and spent a few more days refining a thumb ring. A sparkling and translucent thumb ring was taken out by Han Shuo from his space ring. The name of this thumb ring was the Soul Depository Finger, and its main use was to store souls. After setting up a soundproof defensive formation in the room and summoning a few wraiths to stand guard outside the door, Han Shuo finally took out the Demon's Lair Edge. Holding the Soul Depository Finger in his palm, Han Shuo's consciousness slowly entered the Demon's Lair Edge. First, Han Shuo immediately sensed the main soul within the Demon's Lair Edge that was currently fusing with the Ball of Destruction. Then, based on his understanding of the interior of the Demon's Lair Edge, he roamed among the enormous souls within the Demon's Lair Edge, searching for the soul that was familiar with Gilbert's aura. When absorbing Gilbert's soul into the Demon's Lair Edge, Han Shuo had purposely opened up an area within the Demon's Lair Edge specifically to store Gilbert's soul. After Han Shuo's consciousness entered the Demon's Lair Edge, he quickly found that area based on his familiarity with Gilbert. Within the Demon's Lair Edge, there were all kinds of souls, as well as many negative energies. Some were strong, some were weak, but all of them were very corrosive. Even Dark Dragon Gilbert's soul would be corroded by these energies if Han Shuo hadn't specially opened up an area for him. He might even fuse with those energies and transform into a powerful force for the Demon's Lair Edge's evolution. As soon as he found Gilbert's soul, Han Shuo's mood relaxed. He hastily used his consciousness to wrap Gilbert's soul, preventing him from being affected by the various corrosive energies within the Demon's Lair Edge. Little by little, he brought Gilbert away from the Demon's Lair Edge. Han Shuo's consciousness clearly sensed the joy of Gilbert's soul. It seemed that Gilbert had sensed his master's aura within Han Shuo's consciousness. That was why he was so obedient, following Han Shuo's consciousness and leaving the demon's lair edge without the slightest resistance. A wisp of dim light suddenly drifted out from the hilt of the demon's lair edge. When that wisp of dim light completely left the demon's lair edge, Han Shuo made 2 hand seals, one on the soul depository finger and the other on Gilbert's soul. Suddenly, that wisp of dim light turned into a fine line and fiercely sank into the soul depository finger. The sparkling and translucent ring suddenly flowed with a faint green light. That wisp of fine line constantly twisted and changed within the ring. In an extremely short period of time, a hazy shadow took shape. "Master, is that you, Master?" A voice as soft as a mosquito's came from the ring. Not only could the soul depository finger store souls, under Han Shuo's refinement, it could also transmit the consciousness of the soul. "Gilbert, you bastard! Who told you to be so disobedient?" When Gilbert's familiar voice sounded, Han Shuo's heart was filled with endless emotions. "Master, great master, I'm so happy to be able to see you. This is great. This is really great. Haha." When he heard Han Shuo's words, Gilbert immediately shouted incoherently within the soul depository finger. However, because he only existed as a soul, even though his voice was amplified by the ring, it still sounded as soft as a mosquito's. Gilbert's familiar voice immediately made Han Shuo recall the time when he was together with him. Now, Han Shuo's soul was intact, but Gilbert could only possess a soul. If it wasn't for Han Shuo using a special method to store his soul would have slowly disappeared between heaven and earth with the passage of time. "Idiot! All right, shut up." Han Shuo scolded smilingly, but his heart was filled with warmth. Then, seeing that Gilbert had stopped nagging inside the ring, Han Shuo sternly said, "Gilbert, theoretically, you're already dead. Now, I've used a special method to keep your soul." "Master, I understand," Gilbert said faintly after remaining silent for a while. Suddenly, Gilbert thought of something. He saw that the ring was glowing dimly, and the shadow inside was rapidly revolving. Gilbert anxiously asked again, "Oh right, Master, what happened to my grandfather and the Dark Dragons? Did they manage to escape from the Shrine of Ice's evil hands in the end?" "Don't worry, your grandfather and the Dark Dragons have escaped from the Jade Frost Cage. They should be in the Black Dragon Gorge, Tanai." Besides, Han Shuo knew what Gilbert was worried about. He slowly explained to him what happened after his soul entered the demon's lair edge. "Waha, that's great. Master, kill all the people of the Shrine of Ice for me. Humph, if I wasn't dead, I would definitely make them pay the price. I would kill every single one of them." Dark Dragon Gilbert shouted loudly. "Gilbert, the reason why I placed you inside the soul depository ring and communicated with you is to give you a choice. With your current soul, I have 2 ways to let you reappear in this world. One is to use necromancy magic to turn you into a bone dragon, and the other is to use demonic arts to refine you into a demon general. I'm going to let you choose for yourself." Han Shuo said. "What's the difference?" Gilbert asked. "If it's a bone dragon, you only have a skeleton, but you're still a dragon. But if it's a demon general, you're no longer a dragon," Han Shuo explained. Which one is a little stronger?" Gilbert asked again. "I think a demon general might be a little stronger," Han Shuo replied. "Then a demon general. I just want to be stronger," Gilbert said resolutely. Chapter 484. Kasi Empire, Siro City. Siro City was the capital of Kasi Empire, with a population of 1 million. It was a famous city on the profound continent. Siro City had beautiful sceneries and represented the unique culture of Kasi Empire. At the same time, it was also a city that revered martial arts. In the center of Siro City, there was a large-scale auction held once every 3 years. Truly rare treasures could be purchased at the auction. Every time it was held, it would attract all sorts of bigwigs. Even wealthy people from neighboring countries would travel thousands of miles to attend. In the past few auctions held in Siro City, not only did all sorts of treasures frequently appear, but divine weapons had even appeared twice. The divine weapon, Starry Sky, that Phoebe was currently using, obtained from Kelt, had once appeared at the auction. It had changed hands many times before finally falling into Kelt's hands. This was a truly grand event. Apart from the finale auction, there were also all sorts of peculiar items for sale. Those who knew their stuff would often be able to obtain what they needed there. Every large-scale auction was able to attract all sorts of people, and this time was naturally no exception. Even Han Shuo had spent 3,000 gold coins and used unscrupulous methods to travel to Zero City from the magical transportation matrix in Icicle City after hearing about the grand occasion of the auction in Icicle City. Han Shuo, who had yet to fully recover from his injuries, needed to purchase materials to refine a new body for Gilbert. On the other hand, he needed to take the opportunity to inquire about the current situation in Lancelot Empire. That was why he had come to Kasi Empire's capital, Zero City. Compared to Zero City, Icicle City was only a small city at the border of Kasi Empire. The Dark Mantle's stronghold had yet to reach this place. If he wanted to obtain accurate information about Lancelot Empire, Han Shuo could only come to an important imperial city like Zero City. When he had just arrived at Zero City yesterday, Han Shuo had contacted members of the Dark Mantle in Zero City and learned about the current situation in Lancelot Empire through their information. Just as Little Fatty Jack had said, Bretel City was operating as usual without him. During this period of time, the Bretel City army led by Dorcas and the elite troops dispatched by King Lawrence of Lancelot Empire had officially launched a military campaign against the 7 Grand Duchies. With Dorcas' outstanding talent, once he received the full support of the Empire, he immediately unleashed a terrifying force. In just over a month, under the leadership of Dorcas, this incomparably valiant army had occupied the Bavenden Duchy without the knowledge of the 7 Grand Duchies. Furthermore, with the Bavenden Duchy as their stronghold, they had successfully defeated the hastily allied armies of the Bonton Duchy and the Etmond Duchy. Bavenden Duchy was extremely far from Bretel City. Dorcas's attack this time had come without any warning. Bavenden Duchy had never imagined that the Lancelot Empire would give up what was close at hand and attack them first. Caught off guard, they had no way to organize an effective resistance. Within a week, Bavenden Duchy's military forces had been swept away. Grand Duke Alec Ambridge had died in battle. The neighboring duchies, Bonton Duchy and Etmond Duchy, immediately joined forces to resist, but suffered a great loss in the first battle. Now, the two duchies were defending their city gates while recklessly contacting the other duchies, preparing to join forces to deal with Lancelot Empire's fierce invasion. Of the remaining 4 duchies, Helen's Helen Duchy and Bert Zeely's Bullet Duchy were of one mind with Han Shuo. After Han Shuo had killed Niam Beige, the Bisley Duchy had fallen into chaos. They had suffered disastrous losses under Bert Zeely's attack and were unable to play any role. Only Benedict Sackville's Narsen Duchy could be considered to have some military strength. However, with Helen and Bert Zeely playing tricks in the dark, Han Shuo was almost certain that Benedict Sackville would not be able to escape misfortune this time. With regards to the attack of the 7 Grand Duchies, Han Shuo was truly at ease after learning of the progress of the situation. With the full support of Lancelot Empire, without the shackles of old monster Stadholm, as well as the assistance of Helen Duchy and Bullet Duchy, the 7 Grand Duchies would truly be unable to escape this time. Nothing had changed in Bretel City. During Dorcas's war, Bretel City had acted as a supplier of weapons and rations. When Dorcas had won, Bretel City had seized the opportunity to seize the resources and political power of that duchy. While controlling the situation, Bretel City had also seized command of a region. The situation was excellent. This was the moment when Lancelot Empire had begun to soar. While Lancelot Empire was invading freely, the Brute Merchant Alliance was having a headache. As the protector of the Brute Merchant Alliance, the death of Lightning Sacred Magus Reynold had brought immeasurable losses to the Brute Merchant Alliance. What gave the Brute Merchant Alliance even more of a headache were the magical beasts surging out of Tarag Canyon. These magical beasts were wreaking havoc in the surroundings of several cities, destroying and attacking humans everywhere. The Brute Merchant Alliance was a united organization formed by various large merchant guilds. Doing business between various regions and even various countries was the true way for them to obtain huge profits. However, the magical beasts that roamed everywhere forced the various merchant alliances to station themselves in their cities. This brought immeasurable losses to the Brute Merchant Alliance, a nation that mainly relied on commerce. Therefore, even though the brute merchant alliance knew that the Lancelot Empire was invading the 7 Grand Duchies like a raging fire, and was enjoying the fruits of the invasion to its heart's content, they had no time to spare because of the internal chaos. They could only watch helplessly as the Lancelot Empire continued to expand. Only Han Shuo understood that the cruelty that the brute merchant alliance was about to face was not limited to this. Although Tanai's soul race at Tarag Canyon hadn't made any unusual movements during this period, it was very likely because their level 6 tribal king had been injured in the battle with the Saintess of the Church of Light. Once this 6-horned tribal king recovered, perhaps the brute merchant alliance would want to cry but have no tears. Standing on the bustling street, Han Shuo discarded the thoughts in his head and continued to search for items suitable for himself among the stalls that were everywhere. One had to admit that this so-called auction was indeed worthy of its reputation. Before the actual auction had even begun, Han Shuo had already found 2 good items from among the various materials in the surroundings. The weeping wood. There were tear-stained patterns on the surface of this wood. By grinding the wood into powder and refining it with several medicinal herbs, it could be made into a medicinal pellet that could calm one's inner demons. The multicolor stone. In the refinement of some magical weapons that required flexibility, the multicolor stone could play a role in making the magical weapon extremely tough. It was also useful for Gilbert's new refinement. Gilbert's bones were mixed with the multicolor stone, which could make his bones even tougher. These 2 items were things that Han Shuo had found this morning. The multicolor stone, in particular, was very useful for Gilbert. If Gilbert had chosen to be reborn as a bone dragon, Han Shuo wouldn't have needed to waste too much energy. He could have directly placed his soul into the netherworld and helped him reconstruct his skeleton from his bones. However, since Gilbert had chosen to become a demon, Han Shuo had spent a lot of energy to refine a new body for him, using his original skeleton as the foundation and mixing in various rare and precious materials. Han Shuo felt guilty towards Gilbert. This time, he had made up his mind to refine a new body to compensate Gilbert. That was why he had come here to collect truly rare materials. He wanted to refine a demonic body for Gilbert that could not only give him strength, but also have unlimited possibilities for evolution. What is this? Can I have a look? Han Shuo, who was walking on the bustling street, looked left and right, searching for materials suitable for Gilbert. At this moment, he suddenly saw a dull, palm-sized stone. Han Shuo's consciousness sensed a few faint traces of strange energy from it. That was why he opened his mouth and asked. The owner of the stall was an old woman. She was lazily sizing up the stream of people that passed by. When she heard Han Shuo's question, her attention suddenly fell on Han Shuo. With an imposing figure and extraordinary clothing, Han Shuo could tell at a glance that he was extravagant. The space ring on his finger, in particular, was proof of his wealth. Of course, the old woman's face was plastered with a fawning smile as she took out the stone and respectfully handed it to Han Shuo. Grasping the palm-sized stone, Han Shuo's demonic yuan and consciousness entered the stone together. Squinting his eyes to feel it, Han Shuo's eyes brightened. He looked at the old woman with a smile and asked, "Old lady, how much is this stone?" "My grandfather obtained this item by accident. It has been around for many years. Since you want it, then 5 gold coins." The old woman thought for a moment before replying, "Pa." A bag of gold coins was thrown out from Han Shuo's hand. He laughed heartily and said, "Here are 100 gold coins. I'm taking it. Thank you, thank you." The old woman was pleasantly surprised. She suddenly grabbed the bag of gold coins tightly and looked left and right. Seeing that no one was paying attention, she hurriedly put away the bag of gold coins and packed up the stall before leaving. She had no idea what the stone was used for. 5 gold coins was just a random price. 100 gold coins was definitely a huge sum of money for her. She was in such a hurry to leave because she was afraid that Han Shuo would go back on his word. With the yuan storage stone in his hand, Han Shuo was in a very good mood and continued to stroll around aimlessly. Suddenly, Han Shuo's expression froze as he looked in front of him with some astonishment. He saw a young and beautiful girl with a faint smile on her face, looking at a stall with great interest. It was the beautiful girl who had gone through thick and thin with him in the dark forest, Sophie. Chapter 485. A few years ago, in the dark forest, Han Shuo teamed up with Sophie and Marceau, the Fire Grand Magus of the Brute Merchant Alliance, to explore the place of extreme fire. Because of Marceau's disloyalty, Han Shuo and Sophie worked together and survived the trials and tribulations together. Sophie was originally a citizen of Kasi Empire. Her father, Sulo, was a renowned sacred knight in Kasi Empire. Han Shuo had long known this. He did not expect that after so many years, when Han Shuo came to Kasi Empire, he would so coincidentally run into Sophie. Back then, when Han Shuo and Sophie were separated in the dark forest, Sophie had repeatedly reminded Han Shuo that if he ever came to Kasi Empire, he must look for her. From a distance of 7 or 8 meters, Han Shuo looked at the beautiful Sophie, watching her excitedly picking out some exquisite trinkets. He could not help but laugh. On this long street, all kinds of items were sold, among which there was no lack of truly priceless goods. Unexpectedly, Sophie was not at all interested in those exquisite weapons that were useful for combat, but lingered on the trinket stalls instead. It seemed that it was indeed women's nature to love beauty. These fancy and exquisite trinkets without any practical value were instead a great temptation to Sophie. A few years passed in the blink of an eye. Sophie, who was already beautiful and moving, was like a blooming flower, looking even more beautiful. Looking at this beautiful girl from afar, although Han Shuo was happy, he did not go up to meet her. Han Shuo had a rather good impression of this beautiful girl. Back in the place of extreme fire, the Fire Grand Magus had tried to frame Han Shuo, but was stopped by this kind-hearted girl. On this trip to Kasi Empire, what Han Shuo had done at the Shrine of Ice would make him the public enemy of the entire Kasi Empire. Once Han Shuo and Sophie crossed paths, it was very likely that it would bring trouble to Sophie. Although Sophie's father, Sulo, was a sacred knight and had great influence in Kasi Empire, he was far from being comparable to the Shrine of Ice. Therefore, Han Shuo only took a few glances at Sophie from afar before leaving quietly. He purposely took a detour, then wandered around the bustling streets in search of materials suitable for Dark Dragon Gilbert's body. The Yuan storage stone that Han Shuo had obtained from the old woman's stall was very useful for cultivators and devil cultivators. As the name suggested, the Yuan storage stone could store real essence and devil Yuan. It was very useful when refining some special devil weapons. It could increase a magic weapon's tolerance to demonic Yuan and increase the speed at which the demonic Yuan flowed. When refining Gilbert's body, as long as this Yuan storage stone was completely integrated into his bones, it would be greatly beneficial to Gilbert's rapid progress in the future. Exchanging it for a mere 100 gold coins was simply getting a rare treasure for free. It was precisely because Han Shuo had managed to find 3 extraordinary items in just one morning's time that Han Shuo was rather looking forward to this year's auction in Kasi Empire. Exuberant with energy, Han Shuo did not stop. After bypassing Sophie, he continued to search for items that suited him. With the marvelous sensitivity of his consciousness, in addition to Han Shuo's outstanding foresight, this time Han Shuo had truly reaped a bountiful harvest. In the afternoon, he successively obtained 7 or 8 exotic items that could be integrated into his bones and flesh. It was only when the sky had darkened and the stall owners had packed up and left one after another did Han Shuo reluctantly leave the area. Tomorrow was the day the auction would officially begin. Compared to the items on display at those stalls, the auction that would last for 3 consecutive days would be the real highlight. Every item on display at the auction was a certified treasure. Some priceless treasures would also frequently appear. After returning to the small inn he lived in, Han Shuo closed the door and laid down a soundproof warning matrix. He then took out the soul depository ring and communicated with Gilbert's soul. For the past few days, Han Shuo had been talking nonsense with Gilbert out of habit. Inside the soul depository ring, Gilbert was extremely bored. All day long, he worried whether his new physical body would cause him to lose some of his male functions and desires. Despite Han Shuo's persuasion, Gilbert's worries remained unabated. Gilbert's physical body had already been destroyed, leaving only his soul. However, the bad habits of the dark dragon race were deeply ingrained in him. It seemed that as long as his soul didn't perish, Dark Dragon Gilbert's temperament wouldn't change too much. Don't worry, I will search for the rarest and most precious materials. With your original bones as the foundation and the structure of the human body as the standard, I will rebuild a satisfactory body for you. This body will be even stronger than the body of the Dark Dragon race. Moreover, it will have unlimited possibilities of evolution. The desires and sexual ability that you were worried about will only become stronger. It will never make you a eunuch. Han Shuo, who had a headache because of Gilbert's chatter, had no choice but to promise again. Waha, that's great. Fortunately, I didn't choose a bone dragon. A dragon with only bones doesn't have that organ. Wouldn't I lose a lot of fun? Dark Dragon Gilbert tossed and turned in the soul depository ring, shouting excitedly. All right, behave yourself. Properly comprehend those memories that I gave you. That is a martial technique that can make the soul stronger. You have to spend more energy on it. Gilbert's excitement gave Han Shuo a headache. Han Shuo exhorted helplessly. There were many secret techniques in demonic sections. There were even secret techniques that specifically strengthened and tempered the soul. As long as Dark Dragon Gilbert practiced according to that secret technique, his soul would become stronger and stronger. Once it reached a certain level of strength, he wouldn't need to use the soul depository ring to appear in front of Han Shuo. Moreover, his soul wouldn't dissipate with the passage of time. Some malicious spirits and evil spirits in this world also mastered a certain method under special circumstances. Only then could their soul not dissipate with the passage of time. Moreover, they could slowly strengthen their soul. They could even seize the time of rebirth in the human body and become stronger and stronger. The method that Han Shuo passed to Dark Dragon Gilbert was the method of refining evil spirits in demonic sections. As long as an ordinary soul was willing to painstakingly practice, it could also become a frightening evil spirit, unrestrained by the laws of heaven and earth. Dark Dragon Gilbert's soul was extremely strong. As long as he practiced according to Han Shuo's method, it wouldn't take too much time for him to completely break away from the soul depository ring. Even if his physical body was forged, his soul would still be very useful to him in the future. Master, how do you know so many messy things? I've never even heard of this kind of martial technique that cultivates the soul. How do you know it? After practicing for a few days, Gilbert had already realized the wonders of this method. His soul was becoming more and more tenacious. In the beginning, his soul would lose all strength after talking to Han Shuo for a few minutes. However, after practicing this martial technique for a few days, he could already persevere and talk to Han Shuo for more than an hour. Why do you care so much? Just practice properly for me. After a period of time, when you have a new body, you will know the benefits, scolded Han Shuo. All right, you're so annoying. Gilbert mumbled. Only then did he reluctantly shut up. He quieted down in the soul depository ring and slowly forged his soul according to that method. When Gilbert finally quieted down, Han Shuo also slowly sank into contemplation. During this period of time, Han Shuo didn't continue to practice demonic magic. After reaching the carnal realm, Han Shuo just let nature take its course and didn't deliberately force himself on demonic magic. As for necromancy magic, Han Shuo spent quite a bit of effort. Out of the 3 boundaries of fear, weakness, and aging, Han Shuo had already grasped the 2 boundaries of fear and weakness. In some large-scale battles, these 2 boundaries could greatly weaken the enemy's battle strength and have the effect of reversing the situation. Only the most mysterious and miraculous boundary of aging, Han Shuo really didn't know where to start for the time being. Unable to grasp the knack of it, Han Shuo didn't continue to waste too much energy on this boundary for the time being. Instead, he took the opportunity to grasp the last magic of the necromancy Grand Magus realm, the Grand Disintegration Art. The Grand Disintegration Art was the signature magic of necromancy mages. It was also a magic with extremely high destructive power. As the name implied, the Grand Disintegration Art could disintegrate the enemy's body. In an instant, an expert would die in pieces. This was an extremely frightening magic, But it was precisely because this magic was so frightening that it couldn't be released every time. Even if the Grand Disintegration art was released, a certain probability was needed to achieve that kind of power. Even necromancy mages who were extremely proficient in this magic only had a chance of success once after releasing 5 Grand Disintegration arts in a row. For necromancy mages who didn't particularly understand the essence of necromancy magic, the probability was even lower. Some people could only succeed once out of 10 times. The power of the Grand Disintegration art also varied. The more powerful ones could instantly kill someone, while the weaker ones could only leave behind scars on the enemy's body. Han Shuo had only truly grasped this magic 2 days ago when he was recuperating from his injuries. However, he wasn't particularly proficient at it yet. Now that Gilbert had stopped being long-winded, Han Shuo continued to focus on this signature magic of necromancy mages. He also thought about when to test the power of this magic on a living person. Unknowingly, a night had passed. As soon as the sun rose, loud chatter could be heard from the outside of the hotel. Today was the day the finale auction would begin. Han Shuo had already stopped his research and rushed to the location of the auction. He wanted to see if there would be a greater harvest today. Discussions about Sophie rose and fell, and many of them inadvertently fell into Han Shuo's ears. From the discussions of those around him, Han Shuo discovered that Sophie actually possessed a great reputation in Kasi Empire, and this reputation was not entirely due to her father, a sacred knight, Sulo. The young Sophie was already a sky rider, only a step away from her paladin father, Sulo. On top of that, Sophie was also a summoner, and her own strength was unfathomable. In addition to her extraordinary talent, Sophie's most attractive qualities are her kindness and approachability. There are many legends about Sophie helping poor people and her approachability. In the hearts of the people of Kasi Empire, the kind and pure Sophie was simply a perfect young lady. Especially in the hearts of some youngsters, Sophie was fully deserving of being a goddess. Amidst the clamor, Han Shuo passively accepted many positive rumors about Sophie. Han Shuo, who already had a good impression of Sophie, felt rather moved as he watched Sophie slowly approach on her pure white Pegasus. Yesterday, on the crowded streets, Han Shuo had already seen Sophie. But compared to the way she was today, Han Shuo preferred her approachability from yesterday. Riding on a Pegasus, Sophie wore a faint smile on her face. But when she thought of the person in the carriage beside her, she couldn't help but sigh in her heart, even complaining about her father's inexplicable behavior. In the carriage that came abreast of Sophie, the curtain of the carriage was lifted, revealing a handsome young face. This youth, who was infatuated with Sophie, did not conceal the scorching light in his eyes. Although he did not say a word, anyone could see the intense desire to possess her in his eyes. Feifei, the reason I came to the auction this time is to find a treasure worthy of you, the youth who was infatuated with Sophie said in a mushy tone as he leaned on the carriage and looked at Sophie with a smile. Sophie squeezed out a smile and said, "No, no need. You know, I have no interest in those things." "How can that be? My house of Pilon is the legitimate line of the royal family. Your father has already agreed to our marriage. As the wife of Brack, you will be the most beautiful, the most graceful, and the most luxurious woman. You must have a treasure that can match you," Brack said decisively. Brack's words really gave Sophie a headache. Brack was the nephew of His Majesty the King, Brad Pilon, and the son of Prince Bradley Pilon. In Kasi Empire, the Pilon royal family was the true ruler. For such a family, her father, Sulo, to take the liberty of agreeing to this marriage without her consent, Sophie really didn't know what to do. As the son of Prince Bradley Pilon, Brack could be considered a clean and honest character among the nobles of Kasi Empire. For many years, there hadn't been too many negative rumors about him. The eloquent Brack was a rising star in the political circles of Kasi Empire. Riding on the coattails of the House of Pilon, he rose through the ranks and became a prominent figure in Kasi Empire. Sulo had agreed to this marriage. Whether Sophie was willing or not, in this patriarchal world, Sophie was already Brack's fiancée. Sophie's etiquette education from a young age prevented her from doing anything that would be beneath her status in a formal setting. This time, when she came together with Brack in public, it was only because she was unable to dissuade her father that she reluctantly agreed. As she listened to Brack's incessant ramblings about the future, Sophie's heart grew heavier and heavier. As a sky rider with extraordinary strength, Sophie really didn't have the slightest favorable impression of Brack, a nobleman who was neither good at magic nor martial arts, but was only infatuated with power. If it wasn't for the fact that Brack's family was too powerful, if it wasn't for her father's coercion, Sophie would have long continued to wander around the stalls on the bustling streets. Why would she become Brack's foil and accompany him to some auction house where celebrities gathered? Incomparably vexed, Sophie simply ignored Brack's incessant ramblings beside her. Sitting on her Pegasus, she wore a tranquil and faint smile as she aimlessly swept her eyes across the crowded crowd. She placed her attention on other things to lessen the detestable chatter in her ears. Suddenly, an imposing figure entered Sophie's eyes. Among the crowd there was only one. 7 meters tall, Han Shuo with a height of 1.9 meters and a majestic physique stood out like a crane in a flock of chickens. Moreover, amidst the unbearably crowded crowd, that crane in a flock of chickens appeared rather spacious. This attracted even more attention from others. In the beginning, Sophie only took a casual glance. From her angle, she could only see Han Shuo's side profile. However, half of Han Shuo's chiseled cheeks gave Sophie a sense of familiarity. When Sophie's curiosity was piqued and she carefully observed Han Shuo, this sense of familiarity grew stronger and stronger. As the Pegasus slowly advanced, Sophie's angle of view on Han Shuo gradually changed. By the time Sophie was able to take in half of Han Shuo's face, she couldn't help but cover her mouth and exclaim in surprise. Her bright eyes were filled with disbelief and pleasant surprise. It was at this moment that Han Shuo, who was looking around using his consciousness to search for suitable items, suddenly sensed a gaze that was fixed on him. Han Shuo creased his brows and unintentionally looked in the direction of the gaze. Immediately, he saw Sophie's pleasantly surprised eyes and pretty demeanor. With a sudden start, only then did Han Shuo react. He recalled how special his height would be among such a group of people. In order to not bring trouble to Sophie, Han Shuo gave up on searching for materials to refine Gilbert in this area. He hastily turned around and squeezed his way out of the crowd. Han Shuo exerted force with his shoulders. All the passers-by close to him were knocked to the ground one after another. For a moment, curses rang out one after another. However, when they saw that majestic silhouette, each and every one of them hastily shut their mouths. Sophie, who was riding on a Pegasus in the distance, immediately cried out in surprise when she saw Han Shuo leaving in a hurry. Her slender, lily-white hand lightly patted the spotlessly white Pegasus beneath her, then pointed in the direction Han Shuo had left. The spotlessly white Pegasus, which had deliberately lowered its altitude, sensed its master's surprise and anxiety. It immediately spread its wings and soared into the sky, searching for Han Shuo above the crowd. Miss Sophie, what's going on? A middle-aged knight in front of Brack suddenly exclaimed. Brack, who had been gazing at Sophie, suddenly realized that his target was getting further and further away from him. He couldn't help but cry out in surprise. Raising his head to look at Sophie, who had spread her wings and left, he shouted, "Where are you going? What's the matter with you?" "I'm sorry, Brack. I suddenly ran into a friend I haven't seen for many years." Sophie flew into the sky on her Pegasus. She smiled apologetically at Brack, then once again patted the Pegasus' neck. Whoosh! Under Sophie's command, the Pegasus, which had already identified its direction, fiercely chased after the rapidly disappearing Han Shuo. Chapter 487. That was why he was unwilling to bring her unnecessary trouble. Han Shuo was well aware of the status of the Shrine of Ice in Kasi Empire. Even if Sophie had a sacred knight father, once she got involved with him, she would not come to a good end. The only thing that caught Han Shuo by surprise was Sophie's pursuit of him in public. Seeing Sophie gliding over on a Pegasus, Han Shuo did not know whether to laugh or cry. Oh, it's Miss Sophie. People always liked a lively scene. One after another, they raised their heads to look at the beautiful Sophie riding a Pegasus overhead. They could not help but shout. With that, looking in the direction Sophie flew, Han Shua's rapidly disappearing silhouette immediately attracted the attention of many. The pleasantly surprised expression on Sophie's face made people understand that Han Shua's escape was not because he had done something bad. The scene of the extraordinarily handsome Han Shua forcing a smile as he fled from Sophie's pleasantly surprised pursuit was indeed able to give rise to many wild and fanciful thoughts. As a result, everyone's thoughts went astray. Could it be that this man was the true object of the beautiful Miss Sophie's affection? For a moment, the crowd watching the chase and the escape had such thoughts in their minds. Looking at the prince's son, Brack, who was making a fuss over there, the commoners began to rejoice in his misfortune. They winked at each other and discussed in low voices without the slightest scruple. Interesting. It seems that Miss Sophie has long had someone in mind. Yeah. It seems that Brack is delusional. I've long heard that it was his wishful thinking. He used his father's influence to get old Sulo to agree. Now it seems that's indeed the case. Well, only an amiable and approachable person like Miss Sophie is a true nobleman. Although Brack's family is wealthy, they pursue fame and fortune too much. I'm afraid they are not worthy of Miss Sophie. On the noisy street, such conversations could be heard from time to time amidst the crowd. Pairs of disdainful and gloating gazes, either directly or implicitly, were cast on Brack's luxurious carriage, as though mocking Brack's uselessness. Damn it! What's the background of that brat? How could someone as distinguished as Sophie know such a lowly commoner who mingles among the commoners? Inside the carriage, Brack could see Han Shua's back from a distance. He accidentally overheard some remarks that infuriated him. His heart was filled with rage. Young master, I've never seen or heard of that kid. I think it's just an excuse of Miss Sophie. She just wants to avoid you, young master. She doesn't want to go to the auction with you, so she did it on purpose. The knight beside the carriage whispered. Suddenly, an exclamation came from afar. He's flying, so fast. Brack stared blankly into the distance. Han Shua's stalwart body abruptly broke through the air, turning into a thin line as he rapidly flew into the distance. Behind Han Shua, Sophie, who was riding on a pure white Pegasus, was in hot pursuit. Her figure gradually became a white dot, until she completely disappeared from everyone's sight. Amazing! He must be a respected magister, maybe even a grand magister. No wonder Miss Sophie is always chasing after him. Only such a young and extraordinary genius magician is worthy of Miss Sophie. Yeah, he's really a guy who hides his abilities. Yes, he's just like Miss Sophie, definitely an amiable and approachable nobleman. He even bought a stone from me just now. Only such a character is worthy of Miss Sophie. Thurum, find out who this person is. Brack, who was in the carriage, was originally only somewhat angry. It was only when Han Shua broke through the air and left that Brack became truly angry. He immediately ordered the knight beside him in a deep voice. Yes, young master. Thurum was well aware of what a character who could fly meant. Now that such a character who could threaten Brack had appeared, he, as a servant, naturally knew what he should do. Han Shua, who had used the art of the demonic ninth heavens to quickly leave this area, laughed bitterly in his heart. He really did not want Sophie to provoke him. Otherwise, not only Sophie, but even her family might perish because of him. Who knew that this woman was really somewhat difficult to deal with? She clearly saw that he was deliberately avoiding her, yet she actually took the initiative to chase after him. This was really out of Han Shua's expectations. With one in front and one behind, the two very quickly arrived at a relatively remote and quiet street. Seeing that there was no one around, Han Shua was about to exert his demonic arts to the extreme to shake Sophie off when he suddenly heard a light shout while panting heavily. Han, stop right there. Han Shua was stunned. Seeing that he could not shake Sophie off, in order to let her understand the situation, he looked left and right and shuttled through this remote street at a moderate speed. After a short while, he brought Sophie, who had been chasing after him, to a spacious and quiet square. Standing on a stone step in the square, Han Shuo finally stopped. He turned his head and smiled bitterly at Sophie, who had been chasing after him, saying, "Long time no see. You? Why are you hiding from me?" Sophie's Pegasus landed gracefully. She looked at Han Shuo in bewilderment, her face full of doubt and her tone somewhat indignant. "That's because I don't want to bring you trouble. You've been living a good life in Kasi Empire. Once you get involved with me, you and your family will suffer a calamity," Han Shuo said in a solemn voice, fearing that Sophie would persevere in her pursuit. Sophie was truly taken aback when she heard those words. Her pretty face immediately changed. She first looked around, and only when she saw that there was no one around did she carefully guess in a low voice, "Did you do something bad?" Nodding, Han Shuo frankly admitted, "That's right. I did something very bad. Tell me about it. My father has some influence in Kasi Empire. Perhaps I can help you." Sophie was rather kind-hearted. Not only did she not leave immediately, she was thinking about how she could help Han Shuo. "Forget it. Your father can't help me anyway." Han Shuo flatly refused. Then, he looked at Sophie with a straight face and said, "I will be staying in Kasi Empire for some time. Don't have any contact with me. Just pretend you don't know me." "How can I do that?" Sophie refused to comply. She said in a very loyal manner, "Back in the dark forest, you once saved my life. No matter what, we are still friends. Now that you are in trouble, how can I pretend not to know? Besides, I promised you back then that if you come to Kasi Empire, I will certainly treat you well." "I am not in any trouble." "You will only be in trouble if you know." The more Sophie said so, the more Han Shuo could not let her get into big trouble, so he hastily explained. Who knew that this woman Sophie was really persistent? After hearing what Han Shuo said, she said in all seriousness, "What trouble will I be in? Don't worry, nothing will happen to me. Hee. It's rare for you to come to Kasi Empire. No matter what, as your master, I have to thank you for saving my life." "Miss, the one I offended is the Shrine of Ice. Can you bear the responsibility?" Seeing Sophie so insistent, Han Shuo had no choice but to mention the Shrine of Ice. As expected, when the word Shrine of Ice came out, Sophie was indeed frightened. Sophie looked at Han Shuo in shock. After staring blankly for a while, she cautiously asked, "Han, what's going on? How did you offend the shrine? I know you are a citizen of Lancelot Empire, but I don't know much about you. How did you get entangled with the shrine?" After hearing Sophie's words, Han Shuo realized that Sophie probably did not know his true identity. Back in the dark forest, Han Shuo had casually mentioned the name Brian Han. As Sophie had never heard of this name, she thought that Han Shuo had given a fake name and did not pay much attention to it. She probably did not associate the city lord of Bretel City of Lancelot Empire with Han Shuo. "Don't worry about how I offended them. In any case, the Shrine of Ice won't let me off." "You better not have anything to do with me," Han Shuo replied. "However, as long as the shrine can't find you, there won't be any problem. Isn't that right?" To Han Shuo's surprise, Sophie smiled craftily and took out 2 brown round fruits from her space ring. She handed one to Han Shuo and confidently explained, "This is a gift from a friend of mine. As long as you rub it and apply it to your face, you can change the shape of your face and skin color. No one will be able to tell." As she spoke, Sophie showed the fruit to Han Shuo. She slowly rubbed the fruit in her hands. When it had turned into a sticky substance, Sophie pointed at her own pretty face and slowly smeared the sticky substance on her face. Then, she began to rub the corners of her cheeks in front of Han Shuo. It seemed that this was definitely not Sophie's first time doing this. Without using any mirrors, she relied purely on practice. In just a short while, her appearance had undergone a tremendous transformation. Sophie's fair skin had turned the color of wheat. The contours of her cheeks had also changed. From a pretty girl, she had turned into an ordinary girl. Even the skin of her neck and hands had changed. Some pharmacists had exceptional control over their medicines. In fact, Han Shuo also had this kind of medicine called the transfiguration fruit. Back then, it was Cecilia who gifted it to Han Shuo. On this trip to Kasi Empire, Han Shuo did not use the transfiguration fruit because he was not afraid of being exposed. "Huh, isn't it magical? You definitely can't recognize me now." Sophie, who had changed her face, exclaimed proudly. She then walked to Han Shuo, took out a small mirror and faced it at Han Shuo. She smiled and said, "Hurry up. As long as you use the fruit to change your appearance, no one will recognize you. The Shrine of Ice won't be able to find you, and naturally, they won't be able to implicate me." Even the ingredients had been prepared. Han Shuo really could not find a reason to refuse. He had no choice but to rub the transfiguration fruit with a bitter smile. When the medicine dissolved into a sticky substance, he slowly smeared it on his face according to Sophie's instructions. However, Han Shuo was clearly not an expert at this. The stretching of his muscles would often make his face look sinister and ferocious. Sophie watched as Han Shu still could not adjust his appearance to her satisfaction. Seeing that the effects of the medicine were about to wear off with time, she hesitated for a moment before saying bashfully, "Let me help you." Without waiting for Han Shuo to agree, Sophie suddenly extended her slender jade-like hands and abruptly placed them on Han Shuo's cheeks. Based on her familiarity and understanding of the transfiguration fruit, Sophie began to change Han Shuo's chiseled cheeks little by little. Although the skin color of Sophie's hands had changed, when they landed on Han Shuo's cheeks, they were still warm and smooth. Especially when Sophie was still using her palms to rub, as if she was flirting with a lover, it gave Han Shuo a strange feeling. Sophie was obviously a bit embarrassed as well. Although the blush on her face couldn't be seen due to the change in her skin tone, Han Shuo caught a glimpse of her bashfulness from her eyes. "All right, what do you think?" Just as Han Shuo was letting his imagination run wild, Sophie suddenly stopped and proudly took credit. In the mirror in Sophie's hands, a face that Han Shuo was unfamiliar with appeared. This person had a round chin and thick cheeks, a face that only a fat person should have. Looking at the face in the mirror, Han Shuo could not help but think of little fatty Jack. I really don't look like much." Han Shuo looked at the face in the mirror and answered honestly with a wry smile. The fat face in the mirror smiled, simple and honest. No matter how you looked at it, it looked honest. This made Han Shuo think of little fatty Jack. Because of this, Han Shuo's wry smile became even more pronounced. "Let me tell you, only fat people don't attract attention. Hee. Really, there are fat people all over the streets. No one would think of your original appearance." Sophie explained very professionally, and then added with a smile, "Also, the corners of your face are too prominent and not easy to disguise. This is the only way to cover up the corners with fat." "Ha, I didn't think that you would be so cute after becoming fat." Hee. Seeing Sophie's giggling face, Han Shuo felt that Sophie was purposely making him look fatter, as if she'd be happier if he was uglier. "Up to you. I'll do whatever you say." Han Shuo did not know whether to laugh or cry as he said helplessly, "Here, stuff this into your stomach." Sophie took out a small pillow from her space ring and handed it to Han Shuo with a smile. She explained, "A fat person has to have a big belly, or else he wouldn't be called a fat person." As she spoke, a trace of a sly smile flashed through Sophie's eyes, which Han Shuo just happened to catch. With this, Han Shuo could be sure that Sophie had indeed done it on purpose. However, because Han Shuo knew that Sophie did not have any ill intentions, and his face was already fat anyway, he did not say anything. He took the small pillow from Sophie and stuffed it into his clothes, forming a slightly protruding belly just like that. "Ha, not bad. Not bad at all. Look." Seeing that Han Shuo's belly was protruding, Sophie laughed with obvious malice. She held a mirror in her hand and looked at Han Shuo's belly, even smugly patting Han Shuo's belly. She laughed as she said, "I'll forgive you now. Let's see if you still dare to run away as soon as you see me like I'm the plague." It was only now that Han Shuo understood why Sophie had done this. It turned out that this was all revenge for Han Shuo's dodging earlier. It looked like women were indeed very vengeful. Even a kind-hearted woman like Sophie was no exception. She had used this kind of prank to punish Han Shuo. As expected, one should not offend women, and beautiful and kind-hearted women were no exception. Han Shuo smiled wryly as he lamented, "All right, As long as you change your clothes and deliberately hunch your back, absolutely no one will be able to recognize you. Sophie stopped laughing and looked at Han Shuo with satisfaction as she gave a suggestion to make her work even more perfect. Han Shuo reluctantly took out a new jacket. He had originally planned to have Sophie avoid his body, but when he remembered her prank earlier, Han Shuo had a bad heart. He pretended as if nothing had happened and took off the original jacket in front of Sophie. Han Shuo's upper body was only covered in a sturdy warrior's robe. As soon as this outer robe was taken off, his majestic naked body was immediately revealed. His perfect physique had an aura as sharp as a blade's edge and was filled with the unique charm of a man. Sophie was stunned as she stared blankly at Han Shuo's majestic naked body. Her eyes were filled with amazement and a trace of intoxication. She had probably never seen such a perfect physique before and couldn't even react for a moment. Suddenly, Sophie came to her senses and hastily turned around with a pale face. She stomped her feet and said angrily, "Bastard! How can you act like this in front of me? You're infuriating." Seeing Sophie so flustered, Han Shuo suddenly felt incomparably carefree in his heart. The bad luck from before had all been washed away. He chuckled and said, "Heh, I'm not even afraid of being taken advantage of, so what are you afraid of? You bastard. I knew you weren't a good person before, and now it looks like it was indeed so." Sophie angrily rebuked Han Shuo, and then muttered to herself in a low voice, "This guy's physique is really good." When he heard Sophie's words, Han Shuo suddenly recalled the time the two had spent together in the dark forest. His heart couldn't help but flutter. Are you done changing? If you're done, then quickly go back." Sophie's back was facing Han Shuo as she asked hatefully, "I'm done. Where are we going?" Han Shuo was surprised. Turning around, Sophie said matter-of-factly, "The auction, of course. What place in Kasi Empire could be more lively than the auction today?" "All right." Han Shuo thought to himself that this was exactly what he wanted and readily agreed. Chapter 488. The two had only left for a short while. By the time they returned to the auction house, they had turned into two different people. One was a tall and well-built fatty, and the other was a plain-looking girl from the countryside. They looked very ordinary in the bustling streets. No one would have thought that they were the ones who had attracted everyone's attention. With the help of the city defense army, nobles from various cities of Kasi Empire, and even from other countries, entered the auction center in succession. When Sophie arrived, she did not enter the auction house as Han Shuo had expected. Instead, she dragged Han Shuo along and lingered around the small stalls, excitedly buying some gaudy ornaments that had no practical value. "This thing is worth 3 gold coins at most," Sophie said to the stall owner with a crystal button in her hand. "Miss, you are a beautiful crystal from the southern part of Brute Merchant Alliance. You won't be able to buy it anywhere for less than 5 gold coins." The stall owner was a skinny middle-aged man. He had a sincere expression on his face as he said in all seriousness, "This kind of crystal can be found everywhere. Look, the color isn't particularly bright, and the workmanship of the button is so crude. You actually dare to say that this is a blue dream crystal from the southern part of Brute Merchant Alliance? You really dare to talk nonsense. Here, look, the broken crystal on my chain is a blue dream crystal. Look carefully and see if there's any difference in the luster." Sophie took out a crystal necklace from her pocket and waved it in front of the stall owner, indicating that he could see the real blue dream crystal. Normally, no one wearing a space ring would appear in a place like this. Therefore, when they entered, not only did Sophie put away her own space ring, she also told Han Shuo to put his space ring away as well. This way, the two of them would not be able to find anything different from ordinary people on them. Seeing that he could not fool Sophie, the stall owner's face darkened. He said, "How about this, for gold coins? Take it if you want it, or forget it if you don't." 3 gold coins. Only 3 gold coins. The workmanship of your button is crude. It's only worth this price. Look, where the button and the crystal are embedded, there's a very fine scratch here and here. Sophie was like an expert, going on and on about the flaws of the crystal button. Han Shuo stared at Sophie, dumbfounded. Listening to her unceremonious belittling of the crystal button for the sake of a gold coin, he really didn't know what she was doing this for. Finally, under Sophie's continuous bombardment, the stall owner took the initiative to admit defeat. He handed the crystal button to Sophie with a bitter smile and said, 3 gold coins, take it. Since what you said is completely useless, why do you still want to buy it? Its shape is kind of beautiful. Sophie said something nice for the first time. She happily fastened the crystal button to the corner of her shirt, smiled at Han Shuo, and asked, "How is it? Does it look good?" "It's all right," Han Shuo replied. After a pause, he added, "It matches your current appearance very well. Apart from the rather unique shape, there really wasn't anything special about this kind of fake jewel of poor quality and crude workmanship." However, Sophie's current appearance was also very mediocre. Paired with this ordinary and crude jewelry, it actually brought out the best in each other. Sophie obviously understood the meaning of Han Shuo's last sentence. She rolled her eyes at Han Shuo and lightly snorted, "Boss, ask him for money." "Humph, who asked you to deliberately make sarcastic remarks about me?" 3 gold coins was really nothing to Han Shuo. It was just that Sophie's attitude made Han Shuo feel both amused and infuriated. He casually took out 3 gold coins and handed it to the stall owner. Han Shuo followed behind Sophie and asked, "It's just a few gold coins. With your wealth, there's no need to waste time haggling, right?" Sophie was a sky rider, and her father, Sulo, was a famous sacred knight in Kasi Empire. No matter how one looked at it, Sophie definitely wasn't someone who lacked money. For such a person to argue endlessly with a vendor over a few gold coins really baffled Han Shuo. "What do you know? It's only at times like this that I can feel like an ordinary person." Sophie shot a glance at Han Shuo and said meaningfully. Han Shuo stared blankly for a moment. He thought for a moment, then looked at the annoyance that flashed in Sophie's eyes. He immediately understood what Sophie meant. As the daughter of sacred knight Sulo, Sophie should have been treated like the apple of his eye since birth. It was likely that everyone treated Sophie as a little princess since she was young. Money and treasures, as long as Sophie liked it, it would be a piece of cake for her to have it. It was precisely because of this that Sophie had never experienced the life of an ordinary person. That was why she wasn't interested in auctions where celebrities gathered, but lingered at the stalls of these small merchants and peddlers. Han Shuo had lived in an ordinary family in his previous world. After his soul transmigrated to Profound Continent, his birth was even more humble. He had long gotten used to this kind of life, and therefore wouldn't be that passionate about such things. Unless it was some special item, Han Shuo really wouldn't be able to enjoy much pleasure in such places. "Oh, right. Why are you here?" Sophie suddenly recalled this question after walking for some distance. Soon after, Sophie looked at Han Shuo with some pleasant surprise and said, "You also like to seek pleasure in places like this, don't you?" I should have guessed it long ago. From your clothes and space ring, I can tell that you come from a good background. It seems that we are bosom buddies." Looking at Sophie's self-righteous understanding, Han Shuo smiled and shook his head. He calmly said, "I'm not born into a good family like you. I've suffered all kinds of hardships when I was young. The reason I come to places like this is because those who know what's good for them can definitely find good stuff." "That can't be true. What kind of good stuff can there be in a place like this?" Sophie obviously didn't quite believe it. She came to places like this purely to seek pleasure. Deep down, she didn't think that there was anything truly valuable in this place. "You don't believe me?" Han Shuo looked at Sophie smilingly, as though he wanted to prove it to her. "I don't believe you." Sophie became even more resolute when she saw Han Shuo's attitude. "Follow me." Han Shuo beckoned at Sophie with his finger, turned around, and walked towards another area. It seemed that he really intended to prove it to Sophie. Sophie really didn't believe him. She hurriedly followed Han Shuo, thinking, "I'll see what you can do." After squeezing through the endless stream of people for 70 to 80 meters, Han Shuo stopped in front of an inconspicuous stall. He casually picked up an ordinary gray stone and smiled at the stall owner. "Boss, how much is this stone?" "Oh, 5 gold coins." If you really want to buy it, I can make it a little cheaper. The stall owner casually replied. 5 gold coins it is. Han Shuo didn't have Sophie's special hobby. He casually took out 5 gold coins from the space ring in his pocket and handed it to the stall owner. This time, Sophie didn't argue about the price because she had some doubts. Seeing that Han Shuo had left the stall, she hurriedly chased after him. This place was secluded to begin with. Han Shuo walked a few steps and arrived at a very remote corner, waiting for Sophie. Looking at the gray stone in Han Shuo's hand, Sophie said in surprise, "This is the good thing you were talking about? Any mine would be filled with this kind of gray stone. I can't see any value in it." Shaking his head with a smile, Han Shuo said, "Don't be in a hurry to make a decision. Give me your weapon." Sophie didn't understand, but she still did as Han Shuo said. She took out a long sword from her space ring and handed it to Han Shuo. One look at the exquisite long sword, and it was obvious that it was priceless. Han Shuo touched the scabbard, feeling the smooth and warm gemstones embedded on it. He smiled at Sophie and said, "You are indeed a rich person. No wonder you want to pretend to be a poor person and have some special fun. Don't be so talkative. I want to see how you will prove that this stone is a good thing." Sophie crossed her arms in front of her chest and chuckled as she waited for Han Shuo's proof. Han Shuo smiled and didn't say anything else. He pulled out her long sword from the scabbard in front of Sophie and flicked the tip of the sword with his finger. Dang! The long sword let out a crisp sound. Under Sophie's attentive gaze, the gray stone in Han Shuo's palm turned into a layer of gray powder under the force of his 5 fingers. This powder fell evenly on the edge of Sophie's long sword, lightly sprinkling back and forth until the gray stone turned into fine powder. Then, a ball of demonic flame rose from Han Shuo's palm. Sophie was startled. She looked at the flame in Han Shuo's palm in shock and said, "You also practiced fire magic? That's not right. There's no fire element. What's going on?" Smiling at Phoebe and shaking his head, Han Shuo didn't explain how he was able to ignite a flame in his palm without any fire element. Instead, he reminded Sophie, "Watch carefully." After hearing his words, Sophie didn't ask any more questions. Instead, she focused her attention on Han Shuo's movements. Under Sophie's sparkling gaze, Han Shuo moved the flame in his palm towards the blade of the longsword. Under the roasting of the flame in Han Shuo's palm, the longsword in Sophie's hand slowly became incomparably hot. "Be careful. This is a gift that my father gave me when I became a Skyrider. Don't break it." Sophie warned Han Shuo with a bit of heartache as she watched Han Shuo use the flames to roast her sword. Giving Sophie a reassuring look, Han Shuo's eyebrows furrowed. He secretly circulated his magical yuan and poured it into the long sword through his hand, holding the hilt. Under the dual effects of the flame and magical yuan, the gray powder on the upward-facing blade miraculously melted into the edge of the long sword. Sophie exclaimed softly. She was once again taken aback by the scene in front of her eyes. She exclaimed in disbelief, "I couldn't tell that you're also an alchemist." Han Shuo didn't reply. He continued to focus on melting the congealing stone into the blade, watching all the powder disappear into the blade little by little. Han Shuo had discovered the congealing stone yesterday. It was a peculiar material that could increase the density of a weapon and make energy flow faster. In the treasure book of refining weapons of demonic arts, the congealing stone was a very useful stone. However, in this world, Han Shuo discovered that no one knew its use at all. There were a lot of congealing stones in the place of extreme metal in the Qiluo Mountain. Han Shuo had long mixed an appropriate amount of congealing stone into the demon's lair edge. Therefore, when he saw the congealing stone yesterday, although Han Shuo was surprised, he didn't make a move to buy it. This time, it was to prove to Sophie that there were indeed treasures in this kind of place. That was why he specifically came here to buy one. By the time all the congealing stone powder had melted into the blade, the temperature of the blade was already very hot. At this moment, the flame that was roasting the other side of the blade in Han Shuo's palm suddenly turned from red to purple. There was only a squeaking sound, and light smoke rose from the blade. This was a natural phenomenon due to the sudden cooling of the high temperature. Be careful. You wouldn't be taking the opportunity to use my longsword for an alchemy experiment, would you? Sophie was still very worried about the longsword. While reminding Han Shuo to be careful, she was also suspicious of whether Han Shuo was harboring evil intentions. Take it, inject fighting aura into it, and see if it's different from usual. Han Shuo didn't answer Sophie's question, but threw the longsword together with its scabbard to Sophie. Sophie hurriedly reached out to catch the longsword. As soon as it touched her hand, Sophie exclaimed, "It's a few kilograms heavier." Sophie watched as Han Shuo ground a fist-sized stone into powder in his palm and melted it into the longsword. She couldn't understand how some stone powder could actually increase the weight of the longsword by a few kilograms. This was obviously very magical. Try fighting aura. Han Shuo smiled as he reminded her. With amazement, Sophie immediately injected fighting aura into the longsword in her hand. Sophie had only just injected fighting aura when the longsword suddenly lit up with a silver light of fighting aura. The speed was faster than Sophie had imagined. How is this possible? Sophie exclaimed, looking at Han Shuo in disbelief. She hurriedly said, "The longsword's reaction to fighting aura has increased a lot." "That's right, this is the effect of that stone. You should know that at a critical moment, once your fighting aura is injected into the longsword, you can release its power. This means what in battle?" Han Shuo said to Sophie with a straight face. "I understand. This means that you can seize the initiative and even turn the tables in an evenly matched battle," Sophie exclaimed. Her eyes immediately lit up as she looked at Han Shuo, saying, "This is too magical. How did you do it? It's really inconceivable." Chapter 489. Hee, that's why I said those who know what's good and what's good can still find good stuff in this kind of place. Han Shuo laughed. "Let's go. Show me around. I see that you are a person who knows what's good and what's good." Sophie's face was full of joy. She grabbed the corner of Han Shuo's clothes and pulled Han Shuo towards the bustling area. Han Shuo felt helpless. Originally, Sophie said that as the host, she should properly entertain him. Who would have thought that it would be Han Shuo accompanying her to stroll around blindly instead? It seemed that the words of a woman could not be completely trusted. Seeing that Sophie was in high spirits, Han Shuo did not dampen her spirits. He accompanied her and squeezed through the crowd of stalls. Using his accurate sense of materials, he found a few good things suitable for her. "Han, you are amazing. How do you know so much?" Sophie said excitedly to Han Shuo as she tightly clasped a crudely made jade bracelet in her hand. The jade bracelet was also chosen by Han Shuo for Sophie. After Sophie put it on, she felt that the jade bracelet had the effect of relieving fatigue. After hearing Han Shuo explain all the effects of the jade bracelet, Sophie truly admired Han Shuo from the bottom of her heart. "It's about time. It's already afternoon. Let's take a stroll around the auction house," Han Shuo suggested as he looked at Sophie smilingly. "That place isn't very interesting. We might as well find some fun here." Sophie obviously did not have a favorable impression of the auction house as she replied, curling her lips. "Kasi Empire holds an auction house once every 3 years. There must be many interesting people and items inside. Since I have come to Kasi Empire, it would be inexcusable if I didn't go and take a look. As the host, shouldn't you do your duty as a host?" Although there were indeed some good things on display at the stalls outside, there must be even more precious treasures inside the auction house. Moreover, they must have all been appraised. That was why Han Shuo made such a suggestion. "All right, since you insist, I'll go with you." Sophie reluctantly agreed to Han Shuo's request and followed Han Shuo to the auction house. The auction house was located in an enormous building. When Han Shuo and Sophie walked to the door, a group of knights in shining armor were standing guard in front of the door, courteously blocking their way. Although these knights' attitudes could be considered friendly, they blocked the two's path. "You two, you can't enter without an invitation," one of the knights reminded them with a smile. Han Shuo and Sophie's appearances were ordinary, and the clothes they wore were also very ordinary. After putting away the space rings, there was nothing special about the two of them. People dressed like commoners obviously shouldn't appear in a high-class place where celebrities congregated. Han Shuo coldly snorted. He thought to himself that these kinds of people were everywhere. Although this knight appeared to be courteous on the surface, the ridicule and contempt in his eyes were not concealed at all. Han Shuo could see the disdain in his heart at a glance. Here, these are the invitation letters. Can we go in now? Sophie casually took out 2 invitation letters and handed them to the knight with a light snort. The knight was astonished. Obviously, he did not expect that people like Han Shuo and Sophie would actually be qualified to receive an invitation letter. He stared blankly at Sophie and Han Shuo, momentarily forgetting to reply. Can we? Sophie raised her voice slightly and asked again. Of course, of course. The knight suddenly came back to his senses and hastily replied. He turned to the side and bowed, saying courteously, Please come in. Humph. Han Shuo shot a cold glance at the knight and strode in with Sophie. As soon as they entered, they saw a splendid scene of splendid lights. In the incomparably spacious hall, rows of bright and gorgeous crystal lamps hung high. The floor was covered with a soft red carpet. In the staircase hall that was similar to a luxurious movie theater, every table was filled with exquisite desserts and fruits. Right in front of them, a host dressed in an evening gown introduced the goods with a smile. Multicolored lights converged and fell on an exquisite magic staff inlaid with an aquamarine diamond-shaped gem. Under the illumination of the lights, this magic staff was even more beautiful and dazzling. For some water magicians who loved beauty, this magic staff simply had a fatal attraction. Ladies and gentlemen, this exquisite magic staff was forged by Master Feral of the Elven race. This blue fantasy magic staff can increase the power of water magic by 30%, and it can recover mental strength faster. Hee. As for its design, I reckon that only the word perfect can describe it. Coming from the hands of Master Feral, all of them are shockingly exquisite without exception. On the stage, the host was very provocatively preaching the advantages of the magic staff. Han Shuo observed it attentively for a moment and discovered that although this magic staff was really not bad, it was a pity that it was a little too gorgeous. That extremely beautiful design was in fact not particularly suitable for magicians to wield. That Master Feral had obviously abandoned practicality in pursuit of perfection. Given Han Shuo's temperament, he definitely wouldn't choose this type of weapon. However, its exquisite design had incited the crazy pursuit of female magicians. Due to the existence of the Shrine of Ice in Kasi Empire, the number of magicians who specialized in water magic was the highest. As soon as the host's words fell, the audience immediately boiled over. Just as Han Shuo and Sophie were staring at the stage, a male attendant said with a smile, Please follow me. Are there any private rooms? Sophie looked at the attendant and indifferently asked. The attendant stared blankly for a moment. After sizing up Sophie, he smiled and said, No, they have long been fully booked. Han Shuo understood that in an auction of this level, other than the stair-shaped auction stage in the main hall, there were rooms specially prepared for the real bigwigs on the surrounding floors. People with status would generally reserve their own rooms long ago. Originally, if Sophie had come together with Brack, she would have stayed in a special room. But now that she was staying together with Han Shuo, she could only condescend to it. Forget it then. Lead the way, Sophie said thoughtlessly. Under the guidance of the attendant, Han Shuo and Sophie arrived at a seat at the back row. In front of the two of them were similarly placed exquisite desserts. There was also a magic table on which one could input the exact amount of gold coins. Chapter 490. The auction did not come to a halt because of the arrival of Han Shuo and Sophie. Under the bewitching voice of the host, the bids for the magic staff rose higher and higher. The noise rose and fell, and the hall was filled with incessant discussions. A few beautiful women dressed in gorgeous magic robes made no attempt to conceal their strong interest in the magic staff. This directly led to a small-scale chaos in the auction. What do you think of that magic staff? Sophie couldn't help but ask Han Shuo after the two sat down. Not much. Han Shuo pursed his lips and added, Flashy but impractical. Contrary to Han Shua's expectations, Sophie actually agreed with Han Shua's evaluation. Yes, this magic staff is overly gorgeous. If I were a mage, I would definitely not choose such a beautiful magic staff. Han Shua looked at Sophie in surprise and said with a smile, I thought you would be like them and pursue the ultimate beauty of everything. Snorting lightly, Sophie said, I'm choosing some trinkets from the stalls purely to enjoy the joy of shopping. It's not because I really like them. Oh? Han Shua looked at Sophie with a light smile and pointed at the crystal button Sophie was wearing. He teased, then, why would you wear this crystal button and look like it's so precious? Sophie was taken aback and immediately waved her little fist. She said a bit mischievously, that's because I'm giving you face. You bought this for me. If I were to carelessly throw it to the side, how embarrassing would that be? Han Shua laughed involuntarily. Although he knew that Sophie was purely joking, he was still a bit happy in his heart. Whether or not Sophie had the intention to wear a crude button worth only 3 gold coins on her chest, as the buyer, Han Shua did feel that he had received the respect he deserved. It had to be said that talking with Sophie gave Han Shua a very relaxed and carefree feeling. It was as if he was talking with a female confidant without any restraint. This kind of feeling made Han Shua feel very comfortable. Why is he here as well? All of a sudden, Sophie let out a low cry and immediately retracted her head. She even grabbed Han Shua and pulled him to lower his head as well. Han Shua was suddenly pulled by Sophie, and their heads almost bumped together. A refreshing fragrance immediately rushed into Han Shua's nose, and the natural and fresh fragrance gave Han Shua a sense of smell that he hadn't felt for a long time. Last time in the dark forest, the two had also been so close to each other and surrounded each other's scent. The group of people walked steadily and gradually passed through the corridor on the left of Han Shua and Sophie. Under the respectful welcome of the guards, they slowly went up to the VIP room on the 2nd floor. The person in the lead had a gentle smile on his face. He was dressed in a simple and clean snow-white warrior robe. He had a broad body and thick arms. He had an awe-inspiring aura. It was obvious that he was a swordsman or knight who was good at fighting. Your father? With just a glance, Han Shua was able to sense the power contained in that person's body through his divine sense. This kind of power was difficult to understand without reaching a certain realm. How did you know? You've seen my father? Sophie was shocked and asked in a low voice. Shaking his head, Han Shua said, I saw that he looked a little like you, so I made a random guess. I didn't expect that he really was your father. Looks were only one aspect. The most important thing was that the fighting aura that Sophie cultivated was of the same origin as this person. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to sense it, but Han Shua's divine sense was extremely strong. He could naturally sense it if he carefully sensed it. He must have gone to the VIP room where Brack is. Humph, he's really something. He made the decision for me without my consent. I hate him to death, Sophie said angrily. It seemed that she held a grudge against Sulo. Han Shua wasn't clear about the matter between Sophie and Brack. Hearing Sophie's complaint, he couldn't help but ask curiously, what's wrong? No, nothing. Sophie was actually a little flustered and said hastily. Han Shua was a little baffled, but he didn't pursue the matter. He pointed at the stage and said, there's something down there that's not bad. I think it's more suitable for you. Sophie raised her head and stole a glance ahead. She only heaved a sigh of relief when she saw that there was no trace of her father Sulo in her line of sight. She then looked at the stage in high spirits. At this moment, under the guidance of the host and the projection of the lights, a dark green armor slowly descended from the ceiling. The dark green armor was glossy and bright, sparkling with a dazzling radiance under the lights. This knight's armor is the handiwork of a dwarf master. Although I don't know which dwarf master it came from, but judging from the luster of the armor. After the armor was revealed, the host started to brag again. The armor is indeed beautiful, but is it really that sturdy? Sophie asked Han Shua with some doubts as she looked at the armor from afar. It's all right. It's mixed with a few rare ores, including black iron ore, mithril, and black gold. Forged by the hands of a dwarf, it shouldn't be too shabby. You can consider it, Han Shuo said with a smile. Forget it. My father is in the VIP room. We can't see him from here, but he can look down from the high vantage point. I once used this face to tease him. He'll recognize me. It'll be terrible if he catches me red-handed. Sophie cutely stuck out her tongue. Sophie stuck out her tongue cutely, as if afraid that Sulo would notice her, and shrunk back a little. 20,000 gold coins. Young Master Brack bids 20,000 gold coins. It was precisely because she clearly understood the influence of the Pilon family and Kasi Empire that she felt powerless over the marriage with Brack. A sense of dejection suddenly filled her heart. Sophie suddenly felt that even if she possessed extraordinary strength, wouldn't it still be difficult for her to resist power? 20,000 gold coins. This armor belongs to young Master Brack. The host hammered down the hammer, indicating who this item belonged to. Just as Sophie was in a low mood and had no intention of attending to the auction, another 4 treasures were bid for at a high price. 2 of the 4 items were magical robes with special functions, a scroll capable of releasing a forbidden spell, and the last necklace with 100 diamonds once worn by the Empress of the Verdun Imperial Court who had disappeared. Han Shuo had no interest in any of the 4 items. 3 of them were purchased by 3 magi, and the last necklace was purchased by Brack. Han Shuo noticed that as Brack became more and more arrogant, Sophie's mood became more and more gloomy. This made Han Shuo feel rather baffled. He couldn't understand why Sophie would suddenly become so sentimental. Ladies and gentlemen, the next item is rather special. Even our experts don't know what it is. However, this item possesses a miraculous effect. Once it is inserted into the ground, the plants within several miles will grow even stronger and taller. The host continued to introduce. Following the host's introduction, a tender green leaf, the size of a palm, was presented on a crystal tray. That leaf appeared to be made of dark green jade. It was glossy and bright. As soon as it was presented, the filthy air within the entire auction house was purified. All of a sudden, the air within the bustling auction house suddenly became a lot fresher, as though everyone had entered a lush forest in an instant. Everyone's body and mind seemed to have suddenly relaxed. Han Shuo, who hadn't paid much attention all this while, suddenly jolted. His eyes abruptly emitted a dazzling radiance that no one dared to look straight at. Sophie, who was beside Han Shuo, immediately noticed the change in Han Shuo's eyes. Her gloomy mood was somewhat diluted by curiosity. She looked at Han Shuo in puzzlement and asked in a low voice, "You want this item?" "That's right." Han Shuo replied in a deep voice. "What is this? I've never seen such a strange leaf before. Do you know what it is?" Sophie was a little surprised. She stared at Han Shuo and asked hurriedly. Nodding, Han Shuo explained, "It's hard to explain to you. Anyways, this item is very useful to me. Then you can bid for it. If you don't have enough gold coins, I can lend you some, but you have to return it," Sophie said to Han Shuo with a smile. She then looked at the VIP room above and said to Han Shuo with some misgivings, "I have to lower my head so that my father won't notice you when you're lining up to buy it." It's not convenient to talk about the origin of this leaf, but I think those who know their stuff should be able to tell that it's extraordinary. The starting price is 10,000 gold coins. The highest bidder wins. Let the bidding begin. The host shouted, 20,000, 25,000, 27,000. It seemed that there were quite a few who knew their stuff. Just as the host's voice faded, the price began to climb. Han Shuo was in no hurry to make a move. He merely observed the few competitors with cold eyes. After a round of shouting and wrangling, the price slowly rose to 40,000 gold coins. At this point, those nobles who were purely curious about the use of this treasure gradually stopped participating. The remaining 3 who were truly interested continued to raise the price. Among the 3, one was a real fatty, one was a brightly dressed upper-class lady, and the last one was shockingly Brack of the House of Pilon. Brack was the most excited among the 3. Perhaps it was because he had discovered that there were people who dared to compete with him. He appeared to be very impatient. Han Shuo could even hear his heart beating rapidly due to excitement. Judging from the way that Fatty was dressed, he should be a true wealthy merchant. From his clothing, he seemed to be from the Brute Merchant Alliance. No wonder he dared to compete with Brack. The upper-class lady was graceful. Han Shuo couldn't tell her background, but she should be the most lacking in financial resources. Her complexion was gradually turning ugly. He reckoned that the price of that item had exceeded what she could afford. After watching for a while, when Han Shuo saw that the price had already reached 50,000, he suddenly made a move. A string of numbers suddenly appeared. 100,000. Who is it? The host suddenly screamed and hastily looked at the plate number. The audience was in an uproar. Chapter 491. Over the years, Han Shuo had gradually accumulated his wealth through robbery. Now, even Han Shuo himself did not know how much wealth he had in his hands. Apart from the millions of gold coins in Bretel City under Jack's control, the crystals in Han Shuo's hands were the only things he had. There were almost 1,000,000 gold coins in the card. The virid leaf was a supreme treasure of the wood attribute. Others might not know about it, but Han Shuo was very clear about its usage. Not only could the virid leaf revitalize barren land, it also possessed the miraculous power to revive the dead. Most importantly, if this virid leaf were to fall into Wood Elite Zombie's hands, not only would Wood Elite Zombie evolve faster, it would also substantially increase his strength. Of the 5 Elite Zombies, Water Elite Zombie and Wood Elite Zombie were the weakest in terms of strength and intelligence. On one hand, it was because they were refined relatively late, and on the other hand, they didn't have any treasures that could help them advance further. During the trip to the Shrine of Ice a few days ago, Water Elite Zombie had absorbed a tremendous amount of energy from the Ice Goddess. His appearance had immediately undergone a tremendous transformation. Han Shuo was certain that after the Water Elite Zombie had digested the energy it had absorbed, it would take a big step forward on the path of evolution. This way, the Penta-Elemental Undead formation would have an additional portion of Water Elite Zombie's power. Recently, Han Shuo had been worrying about Wood Elite Zombie, not knowing how he could lend him a helping hand. He did not expect to see the wood attribute treasure virid leaf at this auction. Once Wood Elite Zombie obtained the virid leaf, Han Shuo believed that the Penta-Elemental Undead formation would be able to unleash its full might. Therefore, Han Shuo was determined to obtain the wood attribute treasure virid leaf. In order to make those competitors give up, an extremely high price would dispel their desire to snatch it. Therefore, Han Shuo placed the price of 100,000 gold coins. Number 83. Number 83 bids 100,000 gold coins. Hey, it's actually a friend from the lobby. The host finally saw Han Shuo's number and hurriedly screamed. Following the host's shout, the lights shone on Han Shuo. Everyone's attention was focused on Han Shuo, and their eyes were filled with surprise and curiosity. The other 3 bidders for the wood attribute treasure virid leaf were all in the VIP rooms on the 2nd and 3rd floor. Those on the 2nd and 3rd floor were the true nobles and wealthy merchants. The high price of 100,000 gold coins was rarely seen, except for some publicly recognized treasures. This had already surprised everyone, but when they found out that the bidder was actually from the hall, they were even more surprised. This auction house was also divided by class. Generally, the hall was filled with some small nobles. Usually, people here wouldn't spend money to compete for treasures that were worth more than 50,000 gold coins. Only those on the 2nd and 3rd floor would compete for treasures that they liked without a care for gold coins. Therefore, the highest bidders were usually from the 2nd and 3rd floor. Now, a plain-looking, honest-looking fatty was competing for an item with an unknown function at a high price of 100,000 gold coins. This clearly attracted everyone's attention. Not only some of the guests in the hall, but even the dignitaries on the 2nd and 3rd floor poked their heads out to see who was so generous down there. Bastard, you're so rich. Under everyone's gaze, Sophie, who had lowered her head and even her waist, said angrily, "If my father finds out because of you, I'll settle the score with you." In order not to draw attention to Sophie, Han Shuo didn't speak to her. He lazily sat on his seat, squinting his eyes, looking relaxed and carefree. 110,000 gold coins. Number 9 bids 110,000 gold coins. Suddenly, the host screamed again. Han Shuo raised his eyes and took a glance. He found out that the bidder was that noblewoman of unknown identity. He saw that after the noblewoman made the high price, her complexion became even more unsightly. 120,000. Mr. Zofi from the Brute Merchant Alliance bids 120,000 gold coins. The host shouted again. He was already somewhat excited. 120,000 gold coins was the first high price in this auction. Seeing the enthusiasm of the crowd, he was obviously very happy. So that big fatty is Zofi, Han Shuo understood. Han Shuo had heard of Zofi before. He was an outstanding and famous merchant of the Brute Merchant Alliance. He mainly dealt in magic crystal ores, and also sold some large-scale war equipment. The 6 magic crystal cannons that Helen bought last time came from Zofi. Sometimes, he could earn more than 100,000 gold coins in a big deal. No wonder he was so rich and overbearing. After Zofi made the bid of 120,000 gold coins, the auction hall went silent for a moment. Everyone noticed that the price increase for such an item was slowly starting to increase by tens of thousands. This was clearly beyond what the majority of people could bear. 150,000 gold coins. Oh, it's young Master Brack. Just when everyone was silent and amazed, Brack made his move again and directly raised the price to 15 gold coins. This was really an extremely high price. It seemed that the House of Pillon was indeed rich and overbearing. My 3 friends, this item and the previous 2 items are for my fiancée, Sophie. If you 3 can give me some face, I will be very grateful. All of a sudden, a window of a VIP room on the 3rd floor opened. Brack stood at the window with a very graceful smile. It seemed that even Brack felt the price of 150,000 gold coins was a little too high. Otherwise, he wouldn't have taken the initiative to say so. Given the influence of his House of Pillon and Kasi Empire, most people wouldn't deliberately make things difficult for him. Since young Master Brack has said so, I naturally won't spoil such a wonderful occasion. Sure enough, even Zofi of the Brute Merchant Alliance was unwilling to offend Brack. He stood up from the 2nd floor and saluted Brack with a smile. Thank you. If Mr. Zofi has the time to come to Caesar City, I will definitely entertain you, my friend. Well, I hope Mr. Zofi will do me the honor, Brack invited. Definitely, definitely. Zofi replied smilingly. For a merchant like Zofi, whose business was spread all over the world, although he didn't need to fear Brack, if he could befriend him, it would absolutely be of great benefit to his business. Now that Brack had taken the initiative to extend an olive branch, Zofi naturally knew how to behave. After Brack shouted out the high price of 150,000 gold coins, the face of the noblewoman who had previously competed for the treasure turned ashen. It appeared that her financial resources were insufficient to support her to continue competing. She had no choice but to give up on this treasure that she cared so much about. It was only at this moment that Han Shuo truly understood the relationship between Sophie and Brack. At this moment, he thoughtfully looked at Sophie, who had her head lowered in silence. He roughly understood the situation from her previous words of complaint. With a faint smile, Han Shuo raised his head and looked at Brack on the 3rd floor. He discovered that Brack was also looking at him at this moment. Brack obviously understood that the noblewoman was the first to give up due to her lack of financial resources. Zofi also gave him face and would not continue to compete with him. With that, his only opponent left was Han Shuo, who had suddenly appeared in the hall. When his eyes met with Brack's, Han Shuo discovered that Brack was smiling and nodding at him from afar. Brack appeared to be very friendly. However, there was a hint of arrogance and threat in his eyes. Han Shuo gave a simple and honest smile and lowered his head to look at the counter in front of him. Right at this moment, Sophie, who had been keeping her head lowered all along, suddenly cried out softly, Han, have you forgotten what I told you before? You have already offended the Shrine of Ice. You must not offend the House of Pillon as well. If you really want that thing, I'll hand it over to you after Brack gives it to me. Don't fight with him over it. Han Shuo stared blankly for a moment. He looked at Sophie with a smile on his face. Then, his hand landed on the counter and a string of numbers was pressed down. Only then did Han Shuo say in a low voice, A favor of several 100,000 gold coins is too great. If you accept it, it will be hard for you to get rid of the House of Pillon. Besides, offending the Shrine of Ice is actually the same as offending the House of Pillon. Ice Celestial Kori of the Shrine of Ice is the oldest elder of the House of Pillon. It's just that you don't know about it. 200,000. Number 83 bids 200,000 gold coins. Oh, this is a miraculous person, the auctioneer suddenly shouted. His tone was filled with indescribable astonishment. The audience burst into an uproar once again. Everyone's gazes were once again focused on Han Shuo, as though they wanted to see Han Shuo with their own eyes. Who the hell is this person? Such audacity. Yeah, he still won't let go even after young Master Brack has said so. He's simply not giving face to the House of Pillon. What an audacious fellow. Even if you have the money, you need to be alive to use it. After Han Shuo's sky-high bid of 200,000 gold coins was announced, the audience burst into an uproar once again. Han Shuo, with his sharp hearing, could hear what they were discussing. However, he was inwardly disapproving of it. Why would Han Shuo pay any attention to a mere hedonistic son of rich parents? This friend is very courageous. Brack, who was on the third floor, did not fly into a rage out of humiliation. On the contrary, he laughed and praised Han Shuo loudly. This fellow is famous for hiding a dagger behind his smile. His current appearance shows that he is truly enraged. You are really something. Why did you provoke him for no reason? Sophie lowered her head and explained to Han Shuo in a low voice. Suddenly, a soft exclamation came from Brack's side. That sacred knight Sorrow abruptly focused his gaze on Sophie's earlobe. Sophie, with her astonishing strength, was startled. Even without raising her head, she could sense Sorrow's gaze from above. She hurriedly covered her left earlobe with her hand, as though trying to hide something. Han Shuo saw a red mole the size of a grain of rice on Sophie's left earlobe when she tried to cover it. Seeing Sophie hurriedly covering it, Han Shuo immediately understood why she wanted to hide the red mole. Oh no, I was too careless. I forgot about my father's strength. He could see the red mole on my earlobe from such a distance. Oh no, he must have discovered me. Sophie said anxiously with her head lowered. Yeah, I think he has indeed discovered you. Han Shuo said calmly. Because Han Shuo noticed that after Sorrow let out a soft his eyes began to flicker. Clearly, he understood that the ordinary girl below was his precious daughter in disguise. Then what should we do? Sophie asked in a fluster. She appeared to be at a loss when facing her father. Let nature take its course. Yeah, your father didn't tell Brack about his discovery. He reached out his hand and touched the counter again, inputting yet another string of numbers. 300,000. Oh my God. Number 83 has bid 300,000 gold coins. The auctioneer was so excited that he was about to faint. He screamed at the top of his lungs like a pig being slaughtered. Whether it was because Han Shuo's bid was too high, or because he did not give the slightest face, the face of the smiling Sophie turned somewhat unsightly. He looked at Han Shuo awkwardly, not knowing what to do for a moment. Mr. Sophie, forget it. It seems that this friend is the one who truly needs it. Let's not snatch what others like. If Mr. Sophie has the time, please come to my manor in Zero City to taste some wine. I have a few bottles of truly good wine there. I hope Mr. Sophie will do me the honor? Brack suddenly invited Sophie with a smile while the audience was in a stifling stupor. Sophie stared blankly for a moment. He first nodded his head helplessly, then said joyfully, with pleasure. By this time, Sophie no longer continued to fight. The auctioneer knew that there would not be any more mishaps. He frantically shouted a few more times. Seeing that there was no one else bidding for the item, only then did he make the final decision. 300,000 gold coins. This item belongs to this friend number 83. You're in big trouble this time. We'd better hurry up and leave. Sophie hastily said, Don't worry. Let's see if there are any other good items after this. Han Shuo said to Sophie in a leisurely manner, paying no heed to Sophie's worries. After the wood attribute treasure Virid Leaf was secured for 300,000 gold coins, Han Shuo felt much more at ease. However, this also made Han Shuo and Sophie the focus of attention. When some other treasures appeared later on, the crowd would cast their gazes at Han Shuo from time to time. After the wood attribute treasure, Virile Leaf, 3 more treasures were introduced in succession. A bottle of potion that could restore 80% of one's magic power in a short period of time, an exquisite magic bow forged by a great alchemist, and the ownership of a small city in the south of Kasi Empire. But none of these were what Han Shuo was interested in. Therefore, he did not continue bidding. Therefore, after the Virile Leaf was secured, Han Shuo did not continue bidding until the end of the auction. He was pondering whether or not he should come again tomorrow since the auction would last for 3 days. At the end of the first day of the auction, Han Shuo went backstage. Under the admiring gazes of the crowd, he paid 300,000 gold coins. Han Shuo also received the wood attribute treasure Virile Leaf. However, when Han Shuo opened the box containing the Virile Leaf, his face immediately darkened. He coldly shouted, "Something's not right?" Chapter 492. The Virile Leaf in the box was exactly the same as the one in the auction house. However, the vibrant energy was nowhere to be found. Han Shuo reached out to touch it and immediately discovered that it wasn't the Virile Leaf of the wood attribute at all. It was just a counterfeit carved from a beautiful piece of dark green jade. After spending 300,000 gold coins, only to find out that it was just a counterfeit carved from an ordinary piece of beautiful jade, no one would be in a good mood, let alone Han Shuo. What's going on? Seeing that there seemed to be some kind of dispute, a high-ranking official dressed in formal attire hastily rushed over to inquire. "Lord Zaria, this gentleman says that there's something wrong with the item," the guard in charge of attending to Han Shuo hastily replied. Zaria had been very careful in observing Han Shuo back at the auction house. He had a deep impression of a character like Han Shuo, who would throw away money at a drop of a hat. Moreover, Han Shuo had spent 300,000 gold coins to purchase the auction item. It was only natural for him to treat Han Shuo as a distinguished guest. Zaria, who had rushed over, heard the guard's words and hastily said to Han Shuo, "Can I have a look?" Han Shuo's face was gloomy. He handed over the counterfeit Virile Leaf he had just obtained to the person in charge and said in a deep voice, "Your auction house is renowned throughout the entire Kasi Empire. I don't think you're deliberately pulling a prank on me, are you?" "I wouldn't dare." Zaria could hear the anger in Han Shuo's words. He took the Virile Leaf in his hand and touched it. His expression immediately changed. He abruptly asked the guard in a deep voice, "Who brought this item here just now?" "Galia brought it here, Lord," the guard hastily replied. Zaria took a deep breath and respectfully bowed to Han Shuo. With a stern countenance, he said, "I'm sorry, there's indeed something wrong with this item. Sir, we will return the 300,000 gold coins to you first. Give us some time, and we will soon hand over the genuine item to you." "Han, I don't think this has anything to do with the auction house. They wouldn't do something like this on purpose to ruin their own reputation," Sophie whispered beside Han Shuo. Han Shuo had thought that the auction house was deliberately deceiving him and was prepared to massacre the auction house if they did not admit to it. Now that the person in charge, Zaria, had immediately admitted to the matter and was very friendly, Han Shuo immediately understood that there must be more to this matter. "All right, I hope your auction house can give me an explanation. In addition, this item was bought by me in an open and above-board auction house. I do not wish for you to sell it to others." Han Shuo looked coldly at Zaria and said in a deep voice. Zaria looked at Han Shuo with fear and trepidation. He suddenly realized that this unprepossessing fatty had suddenly become extremely frightening. He could feel an almost tangible killing intent from Han Shuo's body. That stifling feeling of oppression suddenly descended on his whole body, giving him the idea that this person was absolutely not a match for him. For a person like Zaria to be able to climb to such a high position, he was not a simple character. Just from the frightening aura on Han Shuo's body, he understood that Han Shuo was not someone he could provoke. Thus, he He submissively agreed while pondering over how to properly resolve this matter. Give us a way to contact you. Once we find the item, we will immediately look for you to redo the transaction. Zarya, who was trembling with fear, said respectfully after returning the 300,000 gold coins to Han Shuo. There's no need. I will come and take a look myself in the next 2 days. You guys are on your own. Han Shuo coldly snorted. He gave Sophie a meaningful glance and hastily walked outside. I don't think it's a problem with the auction house. I reckon it's Brack, that guy who hides a dagger in his smile. Sophie caught up with Han Shuo. When they were about to exit the auction house and seeing that no one was around, she voiced her conjecture to Han Shuo. Han Shuo grabbed Sophie's little hand. Before Sophie could react, Han Shuo suddenly sped up, pulling her along as they rapidly disappeared into the street outside the auction house. Just as the two were rapidly leaving, Sacred Knight Sulo hurried over from another aisle. He only saw Sophie being held by the hand by Han Shuo as they disappeared into the bustling street outside. Sulo rapidly lost track of the two in the crowd of small booths. Sulo's face was gloomy. Looking at the two disappearing from his line of sight, he mumbled, "Who the hell is that guy?" The image of Han Shuo and Sophie holding hands was deeply imprinted in Sulo's mind. Whenever he thought of the power and influence of the Pilon family in Kasi Empire, Sulo suddenly felt an extreme headache. He smiled bitterly, shook his head and sighed. "Little Fei, you really know how to find trouble for father. Mr. Sulo, what's the matter?" While Sulo was talking to himself, Thuram, who had been following Brack, walked over and suddenly asked, "No, nothing," Sulo replied. Seeing Brack walking over from behind Thuram with a smile on his face, carrying the treasures he obtained from the auction, not only did Sulo not feel the slightest bit happy, he instead began to worry for his entire family. Sulo understood Brack better than Sophie. Brack, who was considered to be quite outstanding in Kasi Empire, was not as kind as the average person saw him to be. Once he set his eyes on something, he would never give up. Once he set his eyes on something, he would not rest until he got it. Unfortunately, the Pilon family was a member of the royal family of Kasi Empire. Sulo understood that he alone would not be able to obtain true happiness for Sophie. Sulo sighed inwardly. He had already decided that no matter what, he had to get Sophie and Brack together. Otherwise, not only Sulo and Sophie, but even the collateral branches of his family could forget about having a foothold in Kasi Empire. Father-in-law, Fei is really headstrong. God knows where she ran off to. Hee, but I'm sure she will like some of these things. Brack walked over, all smiles. He had already begun to express his love for Sophie from afar. He must really like Fei. Fei will be even happier with him. That must be it. Sulo consoled himself before smiling faintly and saying, "That's very thoughtful of you. I'm sure Fei will understand how much you care for her." "Of course. She's my fiancée. Of course I'll treat her well," Brack chuckled. While Sulo and Brack were conversing, Han Shuo had already pulled Sophie into the endless stream of people. It was only when Han Shuo realized that Sulo had lost sight of the two of them did he loosen his grip on Sophie's little hand and explained, "Your father came looking for you just now?" "Oh," Sophie casually replied. Sophie casually replied as if nothing had happened. However, her eyes were somewhat flickering. Her left thumb that Han Shuo had just let go was unconsciously rubbing her index finger. She appeared somewhat absent-minded. Han Shuo was also rather embarrassed. Just as he was about to say something, he suddenly sensed a natural aura brimming with vitality from the southwest direction. He immediately knew that the energy originated from the virile leaf. He hastily said, "I have something to attend to. Wait a moment." As soon as his voice faded, Han Shuo shuttled back and forth among the crowd. Following his consciousness's ability to sense the energy of the virile leaf, he rapidly headed southwest. Sophie stared blankly for a moment before she realized that Han Shuo had already left some distance behind. Sophie knew that Han Shuo had an enemy in Kasi Empire, the Shrine of Ice. Fearing that something bad might happen to Han Shuo, she hastily followed. It was only then that Han Shuo left the crowd. Before he could soar into the sky, he immediately discovered that the energy from the virile leaf had vanished without a trace. Han Shuo was certain that the virile leaf must have been kept by someone. That was why the energy it released earlier suddenly vanished. With that, Han Shuo grew even more anxious. He immediately deployed the art of the demonic ninth heavens and rapidly flew southwest. He wanted to find the whereabouts of the virile leaf before that person left. With Han Shuo flying at full speed, it only took him a few minutes to arrive at the area where the virile leaf had just appeared. It was the spacious plaza where Han Shuo and Sophie had stopped it earlier. At first glance, he did not discover anyone suspicious. When Han Shuo focused his senses, he could no longer sense the energy of the virile leaf. Puzzled, Han Shuo looked all around, rapidly thinking of a countermeasure. Brack was the most suspicious person for the virile leaf, the ultimate treasure of the wood attribute, to have an accident midway. Of course, Sophie and that upper-class lady could not be ruled out as well. Han Shuo was determined to get his hands on the virile leaf, the ultimate treasure of the wood attribute. Having failed to get his hands on the 300,000 gold coins, Han Shuo had already started thinking of other methods. Among the three, Han Shuo felt that Brack was the most likely to use other methods to exchange for the virile leaf. Although Sophie was rich and overbearing, he certainly did not have that much influence in Kasi Empire. As for that upper-class lady, she did not seem to be a particularly influential person. Otherwise, she would not have given up at the mere 250,000 gold coins. After confirming his target, Han Shuo was prepared to snatch the virile leaf. In any case, he had already established the Shrine of Ice as his enemy in Kasi Empire. Emir Brack naturally would not be of any concern to Han Shuo. Han, what's wrong? Just as Han Shuo was pondering, Sophie rushed over, panting for breath. As she did not summon her Pegasus, she was panting even more heavily when she arrived. Her breasts were constantly expanding in Han Shuo's eyes, appearing much bigger than usual. You bastard. What are you looking at? Sophie immediately noticed that there was something wrong with Han Shuo's gaze and shouted angrily. Nothing. Nothing. Han Shuo replied in a fluster. He then explained, I just sensed the virile leaf appearing here, but it seems I'm still too late. Someone must have collected it and brought it to another area. Don't think about it. Just leave it to the auction house. This auction house is the largest in Kasi Empire. Even His Majesty the King has a share in it. I believe they can help you settle it. Sophie consoled Han Shuo. If it's Brack's doing, do you think the auction house can handle it? Han Shuo creased his brows and asked Sophie. Spreading out her hands, Sophie somewhat helplessly replied, I don't know about that. All right, I don't care anymore. It's getting late. Why don't we meet again tomorrow? Han Shuo raised his head to look at the sky. He was about to send Sophie away and ask someone from the Dark Mantle about the location of Brack's manor. Then, he would make a trip at night and snatch the virile leaf. It's still early. What's the hurry? Hee, let's go. I'll bring you to eat some interesting food first. At night, let's go take a look at the night view of Kasi Empire's famous City of Dreams. It seemed that Sophie had no intention of letting Han Shuo off so quickly. She grabbed the corner of Han Shuo's clothes and pulled Han Shuo away, giggling. She continued, I'm only grabbing the corner of your clothes. I'm not taking advantage of you. Han Shuo, who was being pulled by Sophie to another street, immediately understood the meaning behind Sophie's words. He couldn't help but force a smile as he explained, Miss, the previous situation was special. You wouldn't hold a grudge against me until now, would you? Sophie led Han Shuo around a corner. She shot a glance at Han Shuo and said with a smile as if looking for trouble, It's true that the situation was special. However, it seems that when someone grabbed my hand, he was a little unruly, wasn't he? Han Shuo stared blankly for a moment. Only then did he recall that when he grabbed Sophie's little hand, he had used his fingertips to rub against the back of Sophie's hand out of habit. Han Shuo, Emily, and Fanny had done these intimate actions many times. He had done it without warning earlier. Afterwards, when Han Shuo became aware of the ambiguous nature of his actions, he immediately stopped. At that time, He even stole a glance at Sophie. Seeing that Sophie was acting as if nothing had happened, he thought that Sophie didn't mind. Who would have thought that Sophie would purposely expose him at this time? Han Shua's face reddened, but it was hard to tell because of the change in his skin tone. He awkwardly laughed twice and said in embarrassment, "I didn't mind." "Haha, sorry." "Humph, I don't believe your nonsense." Sophie pouted and rolled her eyes at Han Shua. She then said magnanimously, "But I'm a magnanimous person. As long as you have fun with me today, I won't hold it against you." About that, I think I'm a guest, right?" Han Shua said with a wry smile. "What's the matter? If I'm happy, then you'll be happy too." Sophie laughed rudely and pulled Han Shua to run quickly, as if she was purposely trying to make Han Shua stumble. Han Shua had long since seen Sophie's pettiness, but her harmless little joke didn't make Han Shua feel like he was going overboard. His body deliberately swayed left and right, as if he really was stumbling. It was just that in this state, Han Shua would always suddenly lean close to Sophie and would suddenly accidentally bump into her body. Han Shua laughed mischievously in his heart, enjoying taking advantage of her. Chapter 493. Han Shua had a good time that night. He first accompanied Sophie to eat some of Kasi Empire's famous delicacies, then went to the City of Dreams to enjoy the famous night scenery of Kasi Empire. Only when the night was half over did Sophie let Han Shua off, perfectly contented. Using the excuse that she did not dare to go home to see her father, she asked for a room right next to Han Shua's at the small inn, staying right next to Han Shua for the time being. When Han Shua discovered that Sophie had fallen asleep, he silently left through the window and headed for a dark mantle stronghold in Kasi Empire in the dead of the night. Given Han Shua's current noble status, he was immediately treated with the utmost caution when he arrived at the dark mantle stronghold. From their mouths, Han Shua quickly learned the address of Brack's Manor in Kasi Empire, as well as some unknown information about the auction house. Taking advantage of the dead of night, after obtaining the required information from the dark mantle stronghold, Han Shua stealthily made his way to Brack's Manor. He was prepared to search for the Viride leaf and seize it, saving him an additional 300,000 gold coins. The manor occupied an enormous area. When Han Shua arrived, he unfolded his consciousness and was able to sense which area had the most human traffic. After the Viride leaf was put away, it was rather difficult for Han Shua to use his consciousness to sense it. This made Han Shua ponder whether he should employ some special means. Contrary to Han Shua's expectations, just as Han Shua was hiding in the dark and preparing to make his move, he suddenly saw a few very familiar figures. Great Swordmaster Gabriel and the former Griffin Legion's commander, Asher. Asher was originally the Lord of Valence City in Lancelot Empire. As the commander of the Griffin Legion, Asher once enjoyed a resounding reputation in Lancelot Empire. However, because Asher had greater ambitions, under the joint efforts of Han Shua, Lawrence, and the Dark Mantle, evidence of his rebellion was found. After his rebellion failed, he had no choice but to flee from Lancelot Empire. Asher's two precious sons were once Han Shua's greatest enemies. In the end, they successively died in the hands of Han Shua. Asher, who had no descendants, was ultimately forced into a corner and came to Kasi Empire. Gabriel had once joined forces with the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band to almost injure Emily back in the Valley of Sunshine, but had escaped with heavy injuries. When the two arrived at Kasi Empire, they very quickly colluded with Bradley of Caesar City. One had to admit that Asher was indeed rather capable. Even in Kasi Empire, he was highly regarded by the House of Pilon and was still doing very well. Brack's Manor seemed to be hosting some sort of private banquet, so it was only natural that Han Shua would be able to see Gabriel and Asher here. It was just that he hadn't thought of them at the moment, so he was a little surprised to see them. After Asher and Gabriel entered the manor, Han Shua saw some other dignitaries of Kasi Empire arriving in their luxurious carriages. That great merchant Zophie whom he met at the auction house today was clearly on the invitation list. Han Shua had long noticed him chatting merrily and wittily inside. Even that upper-class lady who had previously bid for the Viride leaf was among them. She was wearing a bright evening gown. Although she looked splendid and alluring, she had a frown on her face. Evidently, she had a very heavy heart. Han Shuo, who was observing from afar on someone else's roof, was pondering over where the virile leaf could possibly appear. His consciousness constantly lingered around the manor. Those who were most likely to vie for the virile leaf were all here. Han Shuo believed that the virile leaf must be in the manor. Suddenly, Han Shuo creased his brows. Then, he forced a smile and looked behind him, saying, "Why are you here?" "Hee, I've long noticed that you were absent-minded tonight. I knew you would definitely do something bad tonight, so I left some fragrance on your body. Then, I followed the scent and chased after you." "Humph, you want to shake me off?" "No way," Sophie, who was gliding over on her Pegasus, said with a complacent smile. Han Shuo stared blankly for a moment, then immediately reacted. Previously, when he was fooling around with Sophie, he had taken the opportunity to lean against Sophie. His body was stained with Sophie's delicate fragrance. Han Shuo thought it was a normal phenomenon and didn't pay much attention to it. He didn't expect that it was actually Sophie who did it on purpose. "Young miss, if you follow me, sooner or later you will suffer greatly," Han Shuo said helplessly. He really didn't know how to treat Sophie. "Even I'm not afraid. What are you afraid of?" Sophie let out a soft groan. Soon after, she said excitedly, "You suspect that the thing was taken away by Brack, so you came to investigate, right?" "Nope," Han Shuo replied. While Sophie was flabbergasted, he opened his mouth again. "I came to rob it. As long as I find that thing, I will rob it at all costs. I will kill whoever gets in my way." "Don't scare me, I'm not going to do it." Sophie thought that Han Shuo was joking with her and said with a chuckle. Shaking his head, Han Shuo let out a sigh. He thought to himself that women are indeed strange. They don't believe me when I tell them the truth, but take a lie seriously. His eyes glistening as he stared at the banquet in the distance, Han Shuo pondered on how to search for the virile leaf. Suddenly, Han Shuo thought of Wood Elite Zombie. As a bizarre creature refined from the place of extreme wood, Wood Elite Zombie should be more sensitive to the virile leaf that was of the same origin. When he thought of this, Han Shuo immediately took a few steps back. Disregarding Sophie, who was watching from the side, he immediately summoned Wood Elite Zombie. Why did you summon a zombie warrior?" Sophie was very astonished by Han Shuo's actions and asked puzzledly. Han Shuo did not answer Sophie. Instead, using his consciousness, he started to explain to Wood Elite Zombie about the miraculous and unique energy of the virile leaf. As Han Shuo explained, he could sense Wood Elite Zombie's excitement. Although he had not refined the virile leaf for a long time, he understood what the golden cudgel of the Fire Lotus meant to fire and metal elite zombies. Now that he had the opportunity to own a treasure of his own, Wood Elite Zombie was naturally indescribably excited. After Han Shuo explained everything, Han Shuo immediately saw Wood Elite Zombie gazing at the manor in the distance with excitement. From Wood Elite Zombie's body, a refreshing energy of nature was gradually released. He seemed to be sensing the existence of the virile leaf through this method. Is that thing on him? Why do I feel that he is that thing?" Sophie was startled. She suddenly pointed at Wood Elite Zombie and cried out in astonishment. "Of course not. If that thing was on him, why would I come here?" Han Shuo retorted. Then, he explained, "That thing is very useful to him. The reason why I'm willing to purchase it at a high price is so that he can use it." "Give it to him? A zombie warrior? You are truly an interesting person." Sophie looked as though she had been defeated by Han Shuo. She pointed at Wood Elite Zombie in disbelief and cried out in surprise. "You wouldn't understand." Han Shuo did not explain too much and only paid attention to Wood Elite Zombie. Under Wood Elite Zombie's manipulation, the plants around the manor swayed even though there was no wind. It looked very bizarre. A refreshing and natural feeling filled the entire manor, as though the manor was being covered by the virile leaf. Suddenly, Han Shuo saw Wood Elite Zombie's body tremble. His consciousness sensed that Wood Elite Zombie was incomparably excited. The aura of nature on his body grew stronger and stronger. Han Shuo was startled. He immediately understood that would elite zombie must have sensed the existence of the virile leaf. He hastily asked in pleasant surprise, "You found that thing?" Would elite zombie nodded like a chick pecking at grains. He seemed indescribably excited. Pointing at the hall in the distance, would elite zombie transmitted, "It's inside. It's inside. Who is it on him? Point it out to me." Han Shuo was immediately amazed. This soft shout was not communicated through his consciousness, but a genuine shout. Following this soft shout, would elite zombie pointed at the great aristocrats gathered in the hall and hastily described to Han Shu, that, very fat. It's a fatty. He's inside the ring." Sophie, who was at the side, watched as Han Shuo shouted at would elite zombie. Then, would elite zombie pointed at the people in the hall with an anxious face, as though he was describing something to Han Shuo. At this moment, Sophie was somewhat dumbstruck. She looked at would elite zombie and Han Shuo in bewilderment, unable to figure out what was going on between this man and zombie. It was at this moment that the space ring on Sophie's finger, who was chatting cheerfully with an elegant and beautiful woman, suddenly exploded. Sophie's left hand was immediately blasted into a bloody mess. While Sophie was screaming miserably, the virile leaf slowly flew out from his space ring. Then, amidst Sophie's screams, it rapidly flew towards would elite zombie at high speed. The aristocrats who were chatting and laughing in the hall heard Sophie's sudden scream. Each and every one of them focused their attention on Sophie. They could clearly see the bloody mess on Sophie's left hand, as well as the leaf-shaped virile leaf that was gradually flying out of the hall. Everyone in the hall was dumbfounded. Sophie, who was hiding in the dark, was dumbfounded. Even Han Shuo was dumbfounded. He had absolutely no idea how would elite zombie did it. Catch it, catch it." Sophie screamed miserably. He hastily pointed at the slowly flying, virile leaf with his right hand and shouted. In the hall, Brack's complexion slightly changed. Before he could instruct his subordinates to act, that upper-class woman who once participated in the auction had already dashed out. Her two hands grabbed the edge of her long skirt that tripped her legs and chased after the virile leaf without a care for her manners. Under Han Shuo's command, would elite zombie was rather flustered. However, as the virile leaf had yet to acknowledge him as its master, would elite zombie was unable to control the virile leaf from such a distance. Han Shuo and the other two could only watch as the noblewoman and Thurum gradually approached the virile leaf. However, when the virile leaf flew to the side of a large tree, a bizarre transformation suddenly occurred. With a sudden flash, the virile leaf bizarrely vanished into the large tree. By the time the noblewoman and Thurum arrived in front of the large tree, the virile leaf was nowhere to be seen. Thurum was stunned. He had no idea what was going on. He reached out and drew the long sword that he always carried. It seemed that he intended to destroy the large tree and dig out the virile leaf. No. At this moment, the noblewoman suddenly extended her hand to stop Thurum. Under Thurum's astonished and puzzled gaze, the noblewoman quickly took out a magic staff that was intertwined like tree roots and started chanting an incantation in a low voice. As the noblewoman chanted, the large tree in front of her began to tremble as though it had come to life. Its branches extended like the tentacles of an octopus. A bizarre energy instantly filled the large tree, causing it to move. "She's a druid." Suddenly, a cry of surprise came from the crowd. It was only at this moment that the crowd discovered the true identity of the noblewoman. The druids of the druidic order rarely left the great forest. This noblewoman possessed the mysterious energy of nature, yet she appeared at a gathering of celebrities dressed in a luxurious gown. It was obviously very rare. Therefore, the crowd only discovered her identity after she made her move. After the crowd discovered that she was a druid, their gazes towards the noblewoman were filled with even more amazement. After the noblewoman chanted a string of incantations, the large tree gradually stopped shaking and returned to normal. "Sigh." The noblewoman softly sighed, shook her head, and said in a very dispirited manner, It seems that the druidic order can't retract the hand of goddess. While the noblewoman was sighing helplessly, Would Elite Zombie, on the other hand, was lightly trembling with excitement. The virile leaf that had vanished from the large tree had somehow appeared in Would Elite Zombie's palm. Would Elite Zombie held the Would Attribute Treasure virile leaf in his palms with both hands, appearing extremely precious. Father, I've got it too. I've got it. Would Elite Zombie excitedly repeated these few words. Who's there? Sacred Knight Sorrow, who had yet to arrive, had already shouted from afar. His momentum was rather astonishing. Hurry up and leave. Sophie urged Han Shuo as she turned around. It seemed that she was ready to slip away. Now that the virile leaf was in his hands, there was no need for Han Shuo to stay here any longer. Disregarding Would Elite Zombie's indescribable excitement, Han Shuo chanted a necromancy incantation and sent Would Elite Zombie back to the netherworld. Just as Han Shuo was about to soar into the sky and leave, he discovered that Sulo had already crossed a great distance and was rushing over. Sulo was about to shout for Han Shuo and Sophie to stop when he suddenly saw the spotlessly white Pegasus. Sulo was immediately silenced. His eyes widened as he looked at Han Shuo and Sophie, forcibly stopping himself from shouting. Feifei, what the hell are you doing? Who is this person? Sulo's originally loud shout suddenly turned into an extremely low, angry rebuke. Before Sophie and Han Shuo could open their mouths, Sulo's expression changed and he immediately shouted, No matter what, leave this place first. I'll settle the score with you later. I'm sorry, father, Sophie answered with a bitter face. Seeing that the others in the manor were about to arrive, she tugged at Han Shuo and said, Let's go. My apologies. Han Shuo took the time to salute Sulo and quickly followed behind Sophie. After returning to the small hotel, Han Shuo was in a good mood. He wasn't the least bit worried about what had happened in Brack Manor. There was no reason for Han Shuo to be unhappy that he didn't have to spend 300,000 gold coins to obtain the virile leaf. No one in Brack Manor, including Sulo, was of any concern to Han Shuo. Therefore, even when Sulo saw him and Sophie together, Han Shuo wasn't worried in the slightest. In contrast to Han Shuo, Sophie had a distressed expression the moment she returned. She kept nagging about what she should do. Han Shuo tried every possible way to persuade Sophie for a while before she finally returned to her room to sleep, somewhat vexed. There were still 2 more days until the auction. From the Dark Mantle's information, there really were many priceless treasures up for auction this time. Especially on the last day, it was said that there were even some extremely rare materials. The Dark Mantle wasn't able to find out exactly what those materials were, but Han Shuo was already looking forward to the auction items on the 3rd day. Seeing that it was still early, Han Shuo once again took out Gilbert's soul depository ring, which contained the Dark Dragon, and chatted with Gilbert for a while. The main reason for doing so was to maintain the liveliness of Gilbert's soul, lest he was contaminated with too much of a lifeless aura. In the future, when he rebuilt his physical body, it would be difficult for him to recover his original spirit. Seeing that it was still early, Han Shuo once again took out Gilbert's soul depository ring, which contained the Dark Dragon, and chatted with Gilbert for a while. The main reason he did so was to maintain the liveliness of Gilbert's soul, lest he was contaminated with too much lifeless aura. In the future, when he rebuilt his physical body, it would be difficult for him to recover his original spirit. While Gilbert continued his cultivation, Han Shuo once again began to diligently study the abstruse books on necromancy magic. Han Shuo had always believed that the reason he had yet to master the boundary of aging was because his understanding of the essence of necromancy magic was insufficient. He believed that after accumulating knowledge to a certain level, he would certainly make a leap in necromancy magic. Han Shuo was startled. He immediately understood that the 6-horned tribal king of the soul race had once again established a connection with him. It seemed that after such a long time, the 6-horned tribal king of the soul race must have recovered from the injuries he sustained during his battle with the Saintess of the Church of Light. After a moment of astonishment, Han Shuo began to feel excited. Han Shuo, who could conceal his consciousness, was no longer afraid of the threat of the six-horned tribal king. Han Shuo was certain that if Statholm the old monster and Tiana had yet to fuse their souls with the origin crystal, the six-horned tribal king would certainly have sensed the presence of the other two. Previously, Han Shuo had been regretting his failure to bring the six-horned tribal king to the Shrine of Ice. Now that the threat of the six-horned tribal king had been revealed, Han Shuo began to feel excited instead. Therefore, not only did Han Shuo not immediately activate his consciousness, he even used the miraculous power of his consciousness to transmit a provocative aura to the six-horned tribal king who was thousands of miles away in the Brute Merchant Alliance's Tarag Canyon. The aura contained Han Shuo's contempt and disdain for him. As expected, as soon as Han Shuo transmitted his provocative aura, he immediately sensed the six-horned tribal king's wrath and boundless killing intent. What made Han Shuo even more delighted was that he discovered that the six-horned tribal king's position had already begun to move towards his location. Chapter 495. On the second day, Han Shuo did not go to the auction house. As he had received information from the Dark Mantle beforehand, Han Shuo knew that the auction items today would not interest him. Early in the morning, Sophie came looking for Han Shuo. After learning that Han Shuo would not be going to the auction house today, Sophie excitedly dragged Han Shuo to several scenic spots in the vicinity. As the host, Sophie did her duty as the host. Sophie brought Han Shuo to several famous scenic spots in the vicinity of Kasi Empire's Zero City. Along the way, Han Shuo was somewhat absent-minded. He could sense the six-horned tribal king of the soul race approaching. The threat from the sixth-level tribal king was a constant reminder to Han Shuo, making it difficult for Han Shuo to relax and enjoy the pleasure of sightseeing to his heart's content. A day passed in the blink of an eye. On the third day, Han Shuo finally mustered up enough energy to go to the auction house again. With the experience from the day before yesterday, when Han Shuo had just arrived at the auction house, the person in charge, Zarya, very promptly rushed to Han Shuo's side. He said to Han Shuo apologetically, "I'm very sorry, we have yet to find the item. Please give us a little more time." Having obtained the virile leaf, Han Shuo very magnanimously nodded and said, "No problem. Thank you. We will definitely find the item as soon as possible." Zarya appeared very embarrassed. He beckoned to the guards and instructed, "Entertain our honored guests well." With the magnificent feat of bidding for 300,000 gold coins the day before yesterday, the way these people looked at Han Shuo today was obviously different. After the auction began, Han Shuo did not say much. He merely released his consciousness and inspected some of the people in the auction house. Soon after, he focused his attention on the auction items. Han Shuo was not interested in the first few auction items. Han Shuo sat there in silence and did not make a move, merely waiting for the best quality materials that might appear later on. "Mister, may I sit by your side?" At this moment, the noblewoman who had appeared at Brack's banquet suddenly walked up to Han Shuo. She stopped in front of Han Shuo and gracefully asked, "Oh, of course." Han Shuo replied casually. He glanced at the noblewoman and was a little surprised. He didn't know what this woman wanted to do. Yesterday at Brack's banquet, Han Shuo learned that she was a druid. In Kasi Empire, the Shrine of Ice reigned supreme. Very few other religious organizations would come and go, and the members of the Druidic Order were even rarer. Han Shuo had dealings with Caspian, the great druid of the Druidic Order. He knew that the doctrine of the Druidic Order was to yearn for a natural and harmonious life. Among them, true great druids rarely came and went in the flourishing human society. Even if they preached the doctrine of the Druidic Order in human society, they would do so in the areas with lush vegetation. Han Shuo rarely saw a druid like her who frequented the upper class. Yesterday, this woman addressed the wood attribute treasure virile leaf as the hand of the goddess. It appeared that she had some understanding of the virile leaf. The Druidic Order revered nature, and the wood attribute treasure could make plants of the wood attribute exuberant with vitality. It also possessed some wonderful miraculous effects. This woman regarded the virile leaf as the hand of the goddess of nature, which was rather interesting. "My name is Lillian. a druid of the Druidic Order. She introduced herself to Han Shuo after sitting down. Han Shuo nodded at her with a faint smile and did not say much. This woman named Lillian must have come for something. Based on Han Shuo's observation of her, what she wanted to say must have something to do with the virile leaf. I hope you can sell me the hand of the goddess of nature. The hand of the goddess belongs to the Druidic Order. I hope you can fulfill our wish, Lillian said in a low voice as her eyes focused on Han Shuo. This woman appeared to be around 30 years of age. She had a fair face and a graceful figure. Her looks were not particularly outstanding and could barely be described as elegant. However, there was a kind of dignified and reserved demeanor that only a true upper-class lady possessed. When this kind of temperament was put on her, it made her, who originally did not have outstanding looks, have a different kind of attractiveness. Han Shuo's eyes swept across Lillian's body and said with a faint smile, "You know, that thing is not in my hands. I'm very sorry." Lillian's bright eyes looked at Han Shuo. After a moment of hesitation, she suddenly opened her mouth and said, "What if that thing is in your hands?" Han Shuo frowned. His expression turned somewhat cold as he said, "What do you mean?" Under Han Shuo's gaze, Lillian suddenly felt a chill in her heart. She felt as though she had fallen into an ice cave. In the noisy auction hall, Lillian actually did not feel the slightest sense of security. As a druid of the Druidic Order, Lillian's senses were much sharper than the average person. She immediately knew what this feeling meant. If this seemingly simple and honest fatty in front of her wanted to kill her, she would not have the slightest ability to resist. Lillian was aghast. She hastily explained, "I mean, if the auction house helps you find the hand of the goddess of our Druidic Order, can you sell it to us? We are willing to buy it at a higher price." At this time, Sophie, who was standing beside Han Shuo, tugged at the corner of his clothes. It seemed that Sophie had also sensed the murderous aura coming from Han Shuo. That was why she had reminded Han Shuo of the current situation. The coldness on his face receded. Han Shuo put on a normal smile and laughed. "So that's how it is. Hee hee, when the auction house helps me find it, we can discuss this matter again." 2 days ago, this woman seemed to be lacking money. Who would have thought that after just one day, she would actually be willing to sell it at a high price? It seemed that this woman had raised the money, otherwise she wouldn't have said this. Lillian saw the perfunctory expression on Han Shuo's face. She looked at Han Shuo with a somewhat pleading look and said, "Sir, that thing is very important to our Druidic Order. If you are willing to sell it to us, our Druidic Order will be very grateful to you." "I reckon that I won't be able to obtain that thing. If you have the time, you might as well communicate with the auction house. Who knows, they might have another one." Han Shuo would absolutely not hand over the virile leaf to anyone. This item had an immeasurable effect on Wood Elite Zombie. Han Shuo still had to rely on Wood Elite Zombie to fully unleash the might of the Penta-Elemental Undead formation. Lillian looked at Han Shuo, wanting to say something but hesitating. However, perhaps because she recalled the frightening murderous aura coming from Han Shuo, she did not continue speaking. For some unknown reason, looking at Lillian's hesitant expression, Han Shuo faintly felt that she seemed to know that the virile leaf was in his hands. It was a very strange feeling. Han Shuo carefully observed Lillian and seemed to understand something from her persistent gaze. How did she know? That's not very possible. Han Shuo was baffled. After hesitating for a moment, he probed, "How many gold coins can you offer?" Upon hearing these words, Lillian was pleasantly surprised. "You're willing to sell it to us?" Lillian's pleasant surprise was a subconscious reaction. Han Shuo, who was staring at her closely, could see it clearly. This meant that she was certain that the item was in his hands. That was why she had such a pleasant surprise reaction. In this way, Han Shuo was certain that although he didn't know how she did it, she definitely knew that the virile leaf was in his hands. "If the price is reasonable, I will consider selling it to you after I get my hands on it." Han Shuo casually replied, 350,000 gold coins. "What do you think?" Lillian hastily said, "It seems that they're still not that wealthy. Only 50,000 gold coins, that's all," thought Han Shuo. 400,000 gold coins, 400,000 at most. "I beg you, that's all we can offer." Seeing that Han Shuo didn't respond, Lillian thought that Han Shuo wasn't satisfied with the price of 350,000 gold coins. She said to Han Shuo in a nearly pleading manner, "If it weren't for the fact that the virile leaf was really important to Wood Elite Zombie, Han Shuo might have agreed to it. The price is pretty good. I will consider it." Han Shuo helplessly sighed in his heart and replied to Lillian with a courteous smile. The brain-eating magical beast is a very strange magical beast. It doesn't have a magical crystal core and survives by eating the brains of humans and magical beasts. It is said that it can only be found in the depths of the easternmost sea of Profound Continent. It is extremely difficult to capture. If someone gives birth to a mentally handicapped child, as long as the child eats the brain-eating magical beast, his intelligence will be restored and he will be even smarter than the average child. In addition, it was at this moment that the auctioneer's high-pitched voice sounded. Han Shuo, who was talking to Lillian, suddenly had an ecstatic expression on his face. For the first time, he focused his attention and no longer paid any attention to Lillian's incessant chatter beside him. His eyes were fixed on the items being auctioned on the stage. In Chu Kanglin's memories, the brain-eating magical beast was called the brain-eating demon. It was an extremely rare and mystical beast. Han Shuo was most worried about the reconstruction of Gilbert's brain after his physical body was reforged. However, if he had the brain-eating demon, Han Shuo wouldn't have to worry about this. As long as this last problem was resolved, Han Shuo could gather some materials and immediately start reforging Gilbert's physical body. Therefore, the brain-eating demon was the same as the wood attribute treasure, the virile leaf. Han Shuo was determined to obtain it. Chapter 496. The brain-devouring demon was a type of marine soft-bodied exotic beast that could drill into the brain through the eyes, nostrils, and ears of humans and beasts. It lived by sucking the brains of humans and beasts. They only appeared in the deepest part of the ocean. Their bodies were made of soft bodies that could be quickly reattached even if they were cut into several pieces. Apart from being burned by raging flames, they were practically unafraid of any attack. And in the depths of the ocean, it was extremely difficult for an average person to harm them with raging flames. According to Han Shuo's knowledge, the brain-devouring demon was a rare exotic beast that had many uses. It could be used as medicine to refine intelligence pills, it could be used to reattach severed limbs, and by using demonic arts and a few special materials, it could be refined into a sound-quality demonic weapon that could shatter the brains of humans and beasts. Of course, the most miraculous thing was its ability to repair the brains of humans and beasts. Perhaps because the brain-devouring demon consumed the brains of humans and beasts, its body had a miraculous ability to repair the human brain. For a demonic arts cultivator like Han Shuo, he could make use of the miraculous effects of the brain-devouring demon's body to recreate an exact replica of himself according to his own brain. In this way, even if his brain was shattered in battle, as long as his consciousness did not disperse, he could use the brain refined by the brain-devouring demon to replace it. He could still live a carefree and happy life. In order to reconstruct Gilbert's fleshly body, Han Shuo's biggest headache was the reconstruction of Gilbert's brain. The brain-devouring demon was one of those rare exotic beasts that could only be chanced upon and not sought after. Han Shuo had never thought that he would be able to obtain one. He had even made plans to use other materials to replace Gilbert's brain structure. Little did he expect that he would be able to see such a treasure in the auction house. Therefore, when the auctioneer shrieked and explained the miraculous effects of the brain-devouring demon, Han Shuo was so excited that he no longer cared about Lillian's obsession with the virile leaf. The brain-devouring demon, the base price is 10,000 gold coins. The highest bidder wins. After a series of shouts, the auctioneer announced the start of the auction in an impassioned tone. It seemed like there were quite a few people who knew their stuff. Just as the auctioneer's shriek ended, rows of eye-catching red bidding lights on the second and third floor began to light up one after another. In a few VIP rooms, there were even uncontrollable gasps from excitement. Evidently, some people were very obsessed with this auction item. The son of the Minister of Finance, the grandson of the Minister of War, and the daughter of the head magus of the royal court all seemed to be a bit retarded. Sophie blinked her long, bright eyes and sighed in a low voice, as if in sorrow for these poor creatures. No wonder, Han Shuo thought to himself. He immediately understood that today would be another tough battle. He could not help but focus all his attention on the brain-devouring fiend on the table, listening to the rising price as he waited for the right time to intervene. Suddenly, Han Shuo had a bad feeling. This feeling did not originate from the six-horned tribal king of the soul race that was gradually approaching him. Han Shuo carefully sensed for a moment and suddenly discovered that the temperature of the entire auction house had slowly dropped by a few degrees. Han Shuo furrowed his brows and instantly understood. His consciousness immediately spread out like a spider web, extending outwards bit by bit with him as the center. Not the slightest change in the entire area could escape Han Shuo's perception. Dressed in a snow-white magical robe, the water element demigod Magus Tiana had appeared on top of a building outside the auction house. Her face was solemn, and her entire body was wreathed in mist. Her long silver hair fluttered in the wind, and she held a magic staff in her hand. Her eyes were closed as she muttered some mystical incantation. At the entrance of the auction house, Ice Celestial Corey stood tall and straight with his sword in his hand. He raised his head to look at Snow Celestial Tiana, who was standing on top of the auction house, as though they were silently communicating something. Ice Celestial Corey and Snow Celestial Tiana of the Shrine of Ice, the most powerful demigod existences in Kasi Empire, had suddenly gathered in the auction house. It was very clear what this meant. His whereabouts had been exposed. Having experienced many years of wars, Han Shuo had seen all sorts of situations. Even after discovering that things had come to this, he still did not show any signs of panic. There was even a hint of a tranquil smile on his face. He turned his head to take a deep look at Sophie beside him, and said in a low voice that only she could hear, "Sophie, get away from me. Find a washroom and restore your original appearance." "Why?" Sophie was somewhat baffled and puzzled. "If you believe me, then do as I say. Otherwise, you will bring me trouble." Han Shuo knew that Sophie was the kind of person who would not watch him suffer without doing anything. If he said that not doing as he said would bring Sophie trouble, Sophie would certainly be displeased. Your enemy is here, isn't it? However, Han Shuo had underestimated Sophie's intelligence. She only stared blankly for a moment before immediately coming to her senses. She began to look around vigilantly, as though wanting to help Han Shuo uncover the enemy first. Han Shuo sighed inwardly. He knew that if he did not employ some special means, Sophie would not be easily dismissed. Just as the crowd continued to raise the price for the brain-devourer demon, Han Shuo, who had been sitting there quietly all along, suddenly stood up. Friend number 83, you haven't made a move yet today. What's up? Are you planning to make a move?" shouted the auctioneer when he saw Han Shuo suddenly stand up. He thought that Han Shuo could no longer restrain himself and had finally made a move. He was even more excited than Han Shuo. The auctioneer had already witnessed Han Shuo's boldness the day before yesterday. He had presided over several auctions and had rarely seen a character who would raise the price by more than 50,000 gold coins every time. Therefore, after Han Shuo had appeared today, the auctioneer had been secretly observing Han Shuo. He was the first to discover that Han Shuo had just stood up. Moreover, he had even shouted in his unique voice, "Yes, I'm planning to make a move." Han Shuo smiled faintly. His smile was somewhat strange and evil. The auctioneer laughed heartily. Just as he was about to say a few words to liven up the atmosphere, his expression suddenly stiffened. He looked at Han Shuo, unable to react in time. What are you doing?" Under the attentive gazes of the crowd, Han Shuo, with a speed that did not match his body size at all, crossed the air and landed on the platform at lightning speed. Before the crowd could react, the brain-devouring imp that was stored in a special container was already in Han Shuo's hand. Han Shuo fiddled with it for a moment, nodded his head, and immediately stored the brain-devourer demon into his space ring. It was as if the brain-devourer demon was something that had fallen to the ground in his house, and he casually picked it up. It was unspeakably natural. This is against the rules. This is completely against the rules. Suddenly, flustered and exasperated shouts came from the second and third floors. Those fellows whose sons and grandsons were mentally retarded also started to make a ruckus as if they were retarded. How many gold coins have you bid for? Facing the gazes of everyone on and off the stage, Han Shuo asked the auctioneer with a wondrous smile on his face. Friend, no matter how many gold coins you have, isn't doing this a little too unorthodox? On the third floor, Brack was standing by the window. His expression was clearly displeased, but his tone was still somewhat restrained. This was the credit of his many years of aristocratic education. Raising his head to look at Brack on the third floor, his condescending manner made Han Shuo very unhappy. Therefore, Han Shuo stuck out his big belly, revealed a silly smile, and said to Brack in an uncourteous manner, "None of your business." The audience was in an uproar. Compared to Han Shuo's bold and unrestrained bidding the last time, the uproar this time was even more fervent. The majority of the audience was staring at Han Shuo like wooden chickens. They really couldn't understand how this seemingly simple and honest fatty could have such a bizarre and audacious behavior. Watching Han Shuo's unconventional performance from below the stage, Sophie simply didn't know what to do. She looked at Brack's unsightly face of disbelief, and then looked at the insufferably arrogant Han Shuo. At this moment, Sophie was both carefree and worried. Throughout his life, Brack had never been so humiliated in public. As a core descendant of the Pilon royal family, everyone would deliberately fawn over Brack when they saw him. Even the most boorish commoners and bandits would conceal their usual boorishness. Unexpectedly, truly unexpectedly, in this auction house where celebrities congregate, a simple and honest fatty of unknown origin would actually say, "None of your business," to him in front of everyone. Brack's usual elegance and gentleness had vanished without a trace. Even his disguise of hiding a dagger behind a smile had been torn apart. With an ashen face, he pointed at Han Shuo and said with a somewhat trembling voice, What did you say? Say it again if you have the guts." "None of your business. None of your business. None of your business." Han Shuo very cooperatively repeated 3 times in a row. Soon after, he extended 3 fingers and added, 3 times. The auctioneer looked at Brack with trepidation and hastily said in a loud voice, "Mister, although it was because of us that something went wrong with your item the day before yesterday, you still can't do this today. Thurum, get rid of him for me. No matter who he is, anyone who offends the House of Pilon is a capital offense." Brack could no longer hold back his anger. With his body trembling, he pointed at Han Shuo and ordered the bodyguards beside him to kill. "Yes, young master." Without another word, Thurum raised the long sword in his hand and leaped down from the 3rd floor. Silver fighting aura overflowed from him, making him look extremely splendid and beautiful. However, before Thurum could slash down with his sword, Han Shuo, who was all smiles as he raised his head and looked at Brack, blasted his fist upwards from the platform. A streak of red light flashed and collided with the silver fighting aura that was slashing down. A burst of concentrated sounds of metal clashing instantly erupted. Thurum and the long sword in his hand flew high up from the bombardment of the red light, shooting straight towards Brack's room on the 3rd floor. The speed at which Thurum was flying upwards was even faster than when he was descending. Just as Brack was about to be hit by Thurum, a figure suddenly appeared and hastily reached out to catch Thurum, lest Thurum hurt Brack. The person who suddenly reached out to catch Thurum was naturally Sophie's father, Sulo. When the sacred knight caught Thurum, he discovered that several bones in Thurum's chest and abdomen were broken. An enormous force transmitted from Thurum's body, making him feel extremely uncomfortable. Sulo's complexion abruptly changed. He thought to himself, "Who is this person? How can he possess such frightening strength?" Chapter 497. "How many gold coins?" asked Han Shuo again as he looked at the auctioneer under everyone's astonished gazes. Outside the auction house, The ice goddess and snow goddess of the Shrine of Ice had gathered. More and more experts were gathering here, gradually surrounding Han Shuo. It seemed that they had no intention of letting Han Shuo leave this place alive. 150,000 gold coins, answered the auctioneer involuntarily under Han Shuo's imposing manner. Nodding, Han Shuo took out 3 magic crystal cards from his space ring, each with a face value of 50,000 gold coins. He tossed them to the auctioneer from afar, saying, "Here's 150,000 gold coins. I'm taking it." These 3 magic crystal cards required no password or procedures. As long as the owner confirmed inside, the card could be used to withdraw gold coins from any magic crystal trading firm. When Han Shuo left Bretel City, Jack had specially prepared them for convenience. For example, the race of dwarves did not have a magic crystal device that could convert gold coins. If Han Shuo relied solely on his own magic crystal card, he would not be able to deliver large amounts of gold coins to the dwarves. It was obviously much more convenient to use these magic crystal cards. But, the auctioneer obviously knew that the true value of the brain-devouring demon could be even higher. After hastily catching the 3 magic crystal cards containing 150,000 gold coins, he stared at Han Shuo anxiously, wanting to say something. "It's about time." Han Shuo snorted lightly. Soon after, he cast a glance at Sophie in the hall, hinting her to leave as soon as possible to avoid trouble. What Han Shuo was doing now was simply daylight robbery. As a somewhat famous genius knight in Kasi Empire, although Sophie was delighted by Han Shuo's impoliteness towards Brack, she dared not say much to him at this moment, especially when her father, Sacred Knight Sulo, was in Brack's room. Father-in-law. Suddenly, in the VIP room on the 3rd floor, Brack looked at Sacred Knight Sulo anxiously as he looked at Thurum, who had fallen to the ground at his feet. There was no one in Kasi Empire who did not know of Sulo's name. When Brack saw Thurum being sent flying by Han Shuo's punch, he finally understood how terrifying this simple and honest fatty was in his state of extreme terror. Thankfully, Sulo was by Brack's side. Thus, even though Thurum was injured, Brack was still relatively calm. At this moment, he was looking at Sulo anxiously, obviously hoping that Sulo would help. Sulo was a holy knight. In Brack's mind, a holy knight was the strongest existence on the continent. Sulo understood in his heart that Han Shuo and Sophie were certainly familiar with each other. Perhaps the two even had some friendship. But at this moment, Sulo seemed to have no choice in the face of Brack's earnest request. Hence, under Brack's earnest request, Sulo nodded with a heavy expression. "Mister, you have broken the rules of the auction house. I hope you can hand over the item and participate in the auction in the normal way," Sulo said as he stood by the window and looked at Han Shuo with a solemn expression. Inside the auction house, the various celebrities who had been shocked by Han Shuo's move suddenly came to their senses. Among these people, some had seen Sacred Knight Sulo before. Now that they heard Sacred Knight Sulo's voice, they were even more astonished and started a clamor of discussion. If it were a large-scale battle, given how cowardly these people were, they would immediately leave this place of trouble. But when they saw that only Han Shuo was here, and Sacred Knight Sulo was here, they couldn't help but stay and observe with curiosity. "Mister, what is the meaning of this?" The person in charge, Zaria, appeared out of nowhere, leading a group of guards. Zaria's expression was rather unsightly as he forcefully suppressed the rage in his heart and questioned Han Shuo. At first, Zaria felt apologetic towards Han Shuo. But after witnessing Han Shuo's audacious behavior backstage, Zaria was truly enraged. Kasi Empire held an auction every 3 years, and such a strange thing had never happened before. No matter how much an ordinary person desired a treasure, they would at most wait until after the auction to make use of the influence in their hands to steal it. But Han Shuo's act of openly robbing a treasure under the watchful eyes of the auction house was something that had never happened before. The situation was clear. Han Shuo had earned everyone's enmity. "My apologies. I had intended to bid according to the rules, but due to some special circumstances, I had no choice but to resort to this." Han Shuo shrugged helplessly at Zaria. Sensing that some experts from the Shrine of Ice were approaching, Han Shuo signaled Sophie with his eyes again and prepared to break through the door and leave. Whoosh! Sacred Knight Sulo suddenly leaped down and landed fiercely on Han Shuo. Sulo did not draw his weapon, but his body naturally exuded a swift and fierce aura. While in midair, Sulo extended both his hands. Golden fighting aura blossomed in his palms like a sun. No! Sophie suddenly screamed from below the stage. Seeing that Sulo was not going to kill her, Sophie screamed. Han Shuo creased his brows and shot a glance at Sophie. He suddenly retreated, ignoring Sulo's attack and headed straight for the exit. As Sophie's father, Sulo did not attack Han Shuo the last time they were outside Brack's manor because of Sophie. This time, although he attacked out of consideration for Brack's reputation, he obviously did not go for the kill. Therefore, Han Shuo could not kill Sulo. He could only avoid him and leave as soon as possible. Friend. Actually, the person they're looking for is me. Just as Han Shuo was about to kick open the stone wall of the auction house and seize the opportunity to leave, an old man in his twilight years suddenly spoke not far behind Han Shuo. This old man had a head of messy green hair that looked like straw covering his head. He looked like he had lived for a very long time. The years had left deep scars on his face. Ever since Han Shuo arrived at the auction house, he had been observing every single person in the auction house. Han Shuo had naturally taken note of this old man as well. It was just that when he first observed this old man, Han Shuo did not pay much attention to him because he did not sense any extraordinary aura from this old man. However, just as Han Shuo was about to leave before the Shrine of Ice was completely set up, the old man's words gave Han Shuo a strange feeling as though he was bathing in a spring breeze. When Han Shuo was startled, he unfolded his consciousness and focused all of it on this old man. He suddenly discovered that under the old man's outer appearance that seemed as though it could sink into the earth at any moment, there was actually a vigorous life force. Within the old man's body, Han Shuo felt the power of a vast green forest. This power was full of exuberant life force, more than 10 times greater than that of Sacred Knight Sulo, who was walking over at high speed. Han Shuo understood that the more powerful an existence was, the stronger their life force would be. For this old man to possess such a tremendous life force, and to be able to conceal himself from Han Shuo's consciousness at the very beginning, it meant that he was at least as strong as Han Shuo. Otherwise, Han Shuo would have sensed him. This discovery gave Han Shuo a shock. Soon after, he understood the meaning behind the old man's words. He looked at the old man in astonishment and said, "You're saying that those from the Shrine of Ice outside are after you?" The old man nodded and smiled bitterly. "That's right. It's me." Asterisk crack. Asterisk it was at this moment that a crisp sound was heard from the top of the auction house. The crowd raised their heads in alarm, only to see an enormous hole split open at the top of the auction house. A woman shrouded in a thin layer of mist slowly descended from above. At the same time, the doors of the auction house suddenly opened. Those from the Shrine of Ice, led by Ice Celestial Corey, walked in with grave and stern expressions. "Master Kelly, why didn't you gather with your old friends after coming to Kasi Empire? That's too disrespectful." Ice Celestial Corey laughed heartily as soon as he walked in from outside. Han Shuo took a look at him. Although Ice Celestial Corey was laughing cheerfully, he looked haggard and had a gloomy complexion. It seemed that Corey hadn't been having a good time recently. It made sense. In Han Shuo's hands, the Shrine of Ice's god-making project, which they had spent a huge amount of resources to start, came to a premature end at the critical moment. Not only were all their experts slaughtered by Metal Elite Zombie, they even lost their sacred grade experts. Even in the Shrine of Ice, the number of sacred grade experts could be counted on one's fingers. The death of every sacred grade expert would cause immeasurable losses to the Shrine of Ice. As the supreme leader of the Shrine of Ice, Ice Celestial Corey could only watch helplessly as the strength of the Shrine of Ice not only failed to increase, but was instead weakened bit by bit. It would be strange if he could be happy. As expected, he really wasn't looking for me. Han Shuo was astonished. Then, he discovered that Ice Celestial Corey's gaze had never once landed on him. It seemed that Ice Celestial Corey actually couldn't recognize him without changing his appearance. "Sage, what should we do?" Druid Lillian, who had been chattering incessantly beside Han Shuo, actually came before that old man at this moment and asked respectfully. After hearing Lillian's explanation, Han Shuo suddenly came to a realization. When he looked at this old man again and sensed the vigorous energy within his aged body, he immediately understood that this old man should be a big shot of the Druidic Order. As for why such a big shot would appear in this auction house, Han Shuo also vaguely understood. It seemed that he was here for the so-called Hand of Goddess of the Druidic Order. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.